You've been told healing takes time, that it comes from closure, from someone saying sorry, from finally forgetting the past. But if that were true, why do the old wounds still ache late at night? Why do memories you thought were buried still come back with so much weight? Why does peace feel so far, even when life looks calm on the outside? The truth is, healing doesn't come from the outside. It starts within. And Buddhism holds the ancient medicine the world forgot, teachings that don't just patch the surface, but go deep into the mind, the heart, the soul, not with more effort, but with less. Not by fighting your pain, but by letting go of the self that holds onto it. Tonight, something powerful is going to happen. As you listen, the noise will soften. The tension you've carried for years will start to melt. The past will loosen its grip. You'll feel a stillness you haven't felt in a long time. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of peace returning. When you wake up, the weight won't be as heavy. The thoughts won't be as sharp. You'll feel lighter, softer, more whole. This isn't just a track to fall asleep to. This is a journey back to yourself. The self that doesn't need to be fixed, only freed. Are you ready to heal? Let's begin. And now we begin with the first step in this healing path. A truth that feels so light, it's easy to miss, yet so powerful, it can change everything. The idea of who we are, the roles, the stories, the name in our mind, this is where the pain hides, and this is where it ends. Because the self we've clung to is not a home, it's a trap. And what if healing isn't about becoming someone better, but about dissolving the need to be someone at all? It starts quietly, like a thread pulling free from fabric. You start to notice the tension behind every thought about who you are. I'm not good enough. I was hurt. I'm broken. I have to prove something. These phrases run through the mind like background music, convincing you that there's a fixed version of you that must be fixed, protected, validated, defended. But what if that you was never solid in the first place? What if everything you believed about yourself, your identity, your past, your pain, was built like a sandcastle, shaped by waves of experience and washed away just as easily? Buddhism calls this the illusion of self, the misunderstanding that causes suffering to stick like glue. Because when we think we are something permanent, every experience becomes personal. Every insult is a wound. Every loss is a threat. Every fear becomes an identity. And so, instead of flowing through life, we get stuck in it. We don't move through pain, we become it. We wrap ourselves in titles, traumas, achievements, and expectations, and we call it personality. But it's not. It's armor. And underneath it, there is something that doesn't need protection at all. The truth is, what we call self is just a bundle of habits, thoughts repeating themselves, feelings clinging to memory, reactions built from a past we never questioned. The more tightly we hold on to me, the more we bleed when life doesn't bow to that story. Someone criticizes us, and it hurts because it doesn't match who we believe we are. A relationship ends, and it shatters us because we tied our worth to being loved. A plan falls apart, and we spiral because our self-image depended on that outcome. All of it comes back to identity. And identity is a wall made of mirrors. Every time you try to clean one, another cracks. But emptiness isn't emptiness in the way we usually think. It's not a hole or a lack. It's freedom. It means there's nothing solid to defend. It means that thoughts can come and go without becoming chains, that emotions can rise and fall without becoming a prison, that the story you've been telling yourself about who you are doesn't have to be the one you keep living in. Emptiness is the softening of that grip. It's what happens when you stop clenching the past so tightly that your hands forget how to open. Healing starts when you realize that "I am hurt" is not the same as "hurt is here." One statement traps pain in your identity. The other allows it to move through. The difference is everything. Because once you stop making pain personal, it begins to lose power. You don't deny the experience. You stop becoming it. You stop narrating it into your core. And in that space, in that pause, something new begins: rest. This isn't just philosophy. It's practice. It's waking up in the morning and watching the thoughts arrive without wearing them. It's feeling sadness and letting it float instead of pulling it down like an anchor. It's meeting yourself with the curiosity of someone meeting a stranger. Because that's what you are. New, moment to moment, never fixed. Even your cells don't stay the same. So why should your identity? The more you rest in emptiness, the more you start to sense a different kind of strength. Not the strength of control or certainty, but the strength of space. When there's no one to defend, nothing can really attack. When there's no rigid identity to protect, change becomes less frightening. You don't have to be the smartest, the best, the kindest, the most healed. You just are. And in that just being, the weight starts to lift. Not because the world is easier, but because you're no longer dragging a heavy self through it. Even science is starting to catch up. Neuroscientists have found that the part of the brain responsible for our sense of self, the default mode network, is the same part that lights up when we ruminate, worry, or relive painful experiences. But during deep meditation, that network quiets down. The sense of a solid me softens. And in that quiet, people report feeling open, connected, free. Not better, not perfect, just free. There's a reason monks live simply, wear the same robes, shave their heads. It's not about denying joy. It's about letting go of labels. It's about refusing to decorate the identity. Because the less you carry, the more you feel. The more space you make, the more life can move through you. And in that movement, healing happens without being forced. Like a river smoothing stone, not with violence, but with patience. Sometimes we think letting go means giving up, but it's not surrender to defeat, it's surrender to reality. When you stop clinging to being someone, you make room to be anything, even joy, even lightness, even silence. And the mind, when no longer weighed down by self-reference, becomes like a clear sky. Thoughts come and go like clouds, but the sky remains untouched. Think about how many of your deepest wounds are tied to identity. Being rejected by someone made you feel unlovable. Failing at something made you feel like a failure. Being betrayed made you feel like you weren't worth loyalty. But these are events, not definitions. The mistake is thinking they say something about who you are. Emptiness says they don't. They happened. They passed. They are part of a moving, changing, impermanent stream. But you are not the river. You are the awareness watching it flow. Even trauma, which feels carved into the soul, starts to loosen when we stop holding it as mine. Not to dismiss it, but to release the grip, to say, this pain is here, instead of this pain is me. In that simple shift, you step out of the role of victim and into the role of witness. And a witness doesn't need to fix anything. A witness just sees. And in being seen, the wound begins to soften. You don't need to become a monk. You don't need to shave your head or live in silence. You just need to start watching how often you refer back to me. I'm like this. I always do this. I can't change. I need to be seen this way. Every one of those thoughts is a brick. But the mind doesn't need a fortress. It needs openness. Because healing doesn't come from building more walls. It comes from tearing down the ones that no longer serve you. And here's the paradox. The less you hold on to identity, the more whole you feel. Not because you figured out who you are, but because you stopped needing to. And in that stopping, you return to something deeper than personality, deeper than memory. A stillness, a presence, a peace that isn't about fixing the past, but seeing through it. It might feel strange at first, to not define yourself by your pain, to let go of the story you've told for years. But in that space, you'll notice something gentle starting to rise. Compassion. Not just for others, but for the self you used to hold so tightly. You'll see that even your clinging came from love, from trying to stay safe, from needing to matter. And suddenly, you don't need to shame the self. You can just bow to it, thank it, and let it rest. Healing isn't a race, it's a return. Not to who you were before the pain, but to who you were underneath it the entire time. The part of you that's never been broken, because it was never a thing, it was awareness itself. And that awareness doesn't need protection. It doesn't need titles. It doesn't even need understanding. It just is. And that, right there, is the medicine of emptiness. It's not emptiness in the hollow sense. It's emptiness in the Buddhist sense. No fixed self, no hard edges, no permanent identity, just space. And in that space, healing doesn't have to be manufactured. It reveals itself, like light through a crack. So tonight, as your mind begins to slow down, watch your thoughts come and go without attaching. Listen to the voice inside without believing it's all of you. Let yourself be quiet without reaching for meaning. And in that quiet, feel how the weight begins to lift. Not because you solved the pain, but because you stopped carrying it as mine. Emptiness doesn't mean you disappear. It means the story that hurt you loses its grip. And what's left is presence, soft, quiet, alive. And now, after seeing how letting go of the idea of a fixed self begins to dissolve suffering at its root, we arrive at something even more subtle, yet just as transformative. Because after identity fades, what's left is space, and in that space, something sacred has room to grow: silence. Not the kind that feels empty or awkward, but the kind that heals, the kind that doesn't just quiet the room, it rewires the mind. This is where noble silence begins its work, not with answers, but with absence, not with effort, but with stillness. Silence is not the absence of noise, it's the presence of peace. It's not about turning down the world. It's about finally hearing what's underneath the world's constant shouting. In Buddhist tradition, silence isn't just a break from speaking. It's a full retreat from the need to explain, justify, perform, or control. When speech pauses, thinking softens. When thinking softens, reaction weakens. And when reaction weakens, clarity starts to return, not because it was found, but because it was never gone. It was just drowned in noise. Most people think healing has to be loud, talking it out, thinking it through, fixing it. But some things inside us aren't meant to be solved like a puzzle. They are meant to be held, witnessed, allowed. And silence is the space that makes that possible. The nervous system doesn't need more pressure to recover. It needs less. Silence is that relief. Like loosening the grip on a rope you've been holding too tightly, it gives the whole body permission to relax. When a monk enters noble silence, it's not to escape the world. It's to re-enter it more clearly, because the noise outside often matches the noise inside. Every conversation we have, every reaction we give, every story we retell becomes another layer on top of the mind. Silence strips those layers back. It shows us what's underneath the commentary. Beneath all the opinions, doubts, and plans, there's a calm that has always been there, not built by effort, but revealed through stillness. Science now confirms what ancient monks knew. The nervous system operates in two modes, fight or flight, and rest and digest. Most people spend their lives stuck in the first, always rushing, reacting, overstimulated. Even when sitting still, the mind races. Noble silence activates the second. It slows the heart, calms the breath, lowers cortisol, and allows the body to shift from survival into restoration. It's not just peace, it's medicine. In silence, the brain stops jumping from one thought to the next and begins to process deeper layers. Things buried under years of noise start to rise gently. Regrets, old conversations, unmet feelings. But here's the miracle. Because there's no talking, there's also no defending. No one to impress, no one to blame. Just the self, meeting itself, without judgment, without interruption. That's where emotional detox begins. Noble silence isn't just about staying quiet. It's about withdrawing from the constant compulsion to comment on everything, to fill every space, to answer every discomfort. Most people, when faced with stillness, panic. They reach for their phone, their music, a conversation, anything to avoid sitting with what's underneath. But those who stay find something rare, their own clarity. Thoughts begin to lose their urgency, emotions stop boiling over, patterns once hidden in the chaos become visible, and once seen, they no longer control. Silence creates the space where the mind can finally become aware of itself without reacting. Like mud settling in water, everything becomes clearer, not because the water was cleaned, but because it was undisturbed. In many Buddhist monasteries, noble silence is a cornerstone, not just during meditation, but across entire days, sometimes weeks. Meals are taken in silence. Walking is done in silence. Even eye contact is avoided to prevent triggering the mind into distraction. The point isn't to punish the senses, it's to release their grip, because the senses are constantly pulling attention outward. Silence reverses that flow. It turns awareness inward, and what it finds there is not always easy. When the world quiets down, the echoes of our inner wounds can grow louder. That's part of the healing. In silence, you meet what was buried, the resentment never voiced, the fear never named, the sadness never held. But now, instead of pushing them away or drowning them in words, you can just sit, watch, breathe, let them pass without resistance. They rise, they fall, they fade, just like everything else. This kind of silence isn't passive. It's active surrender. It's deep engagement without interference. It's not avoiding life. It's seeing it with such precision that the usual clutter falls away. You stop getting caught in the drama. You start to see the mind's tricks, the way it spins stories, blames others, replays old pain. And in that awareness, healing begins, not by force, but by exposure. Even just a few hours of noble silence can feel like a deep inner reset. The body softens, the breath deepens, the mind begins to notice its own patterns. Noticing becomes the new listening. And in that listening, the need to fix dissolves. Clarity replaces panic, awareness replaces anxiety, and the frantic need to do something gives way to the quiet strength of simply being. People who return from silent retreats often describe it as life-changing, not because they learned something new, but because they finally heard what was always inside them. Silence doesn't add anything. It reveals what was already true, that you don't need more words to be understood. You don't need more noise to feel alive. You don't need to explain yourself to find peace. And here's the strange part. Silence begins to feel safer than noise. You start craving it, not because you want to escape, but because it feels like home. There's no one to pretend for, no mask to wear, no role to play. In silence, you can just be. And being, without needing to become something, is the most healing state of all. This isn't about becoming a hermit. It's about integrating the power of silence into everyday life. A few minutes of stillness before a meeting, a quiet walk without your phone, sitting with a cup of tea, not scrolling, just breathing. These tiny rituals begin to recalibrate your nervous system. They create a rhythm of presence, and presence heals what pressure never could. Noble silence also teaches restraint, the wisdom of not needing to say everything that arises, of knowing that not all reactions need a voice, that sometimes silence is the highest response, especially when emotions are high, especially when the mind wants to fight. In those moments, silence isn't avoidance, it's mastery. This is why so many Buddhist teachers speak slowly, pause often, leave space. Not because they're unsure, but because they're in tune with the silence behind the words. They know that real understanding doesn't come from volume, it comes from space, and space is where healing breathes, and over time, this silence seeps into the way you live. Your nervous system stops bracing for impact. Your breath flows deeper without effort. Your thoughts feel less like commands and more like clouds. Even when speaking returns, it comes from a quieter place, a place not trying to prove, defend, or control. Just share, just connect, just be. In this world, silence is rare, but rare things are often the most valuable. So when you find it, protect it, make room for it, treat it like sacred ground, because it is. Silence isn't just a break, it's a path, one that leads not away from pain but through it, with more ease than you thought possible. Let this be your invitation, not to run from noise, but to explore what exists beneath it, not to fear stillness, but to step into it like warm light. Let silence wrap around the parts of you that haven't had room to breathe. Let it hold the chaos, the tiredness, the grief. And watch how, without a word, something inside starts to settle. And now, from the stillness where the mind finally rests and the nervous system begins to repair, something unexpected rises. A warmth, a softness that doesn't feel like weakness, but like truth returning to the surface. Because once the noise fades, what you start to feel isn't just peace, it's tenderness. And this is where the real transformation begins. Not with effort, not with resistance, but with compassion. The kind that doesn't ask for explanation, the kind that doesn't try to fix, escape, or analyze pain, but simply sits with it. This is the blade that cuts through suffering, not by force, but by mercy. Most people think strength means staying unaffected, but numbness isn't strength. It's shut down. And shut down doesn't heal anything. What actually heals is contact. Not the kind that grips or pushes, but the kind that meets pain like an old friend. Metta, or loving kindness, is not about being soft in a fragile way. It's about softening with power, the kind of power that doesn't need to win. It just needs to stay open. Compassion is not a decoration. It's a discipline, a quiet, daily decision to stay kind even when life isn't. Pain doesn't need to be attacked. It needs to be held, because what we resist, we repeat, and what we avoid, we carry. Metta is how we stop the cycle. It is the exact opposite of denial. It brings awareness to the parts of us we've abandoned, the fear we pretend isn't there, the shame we try to silence, the sadness we think is too much. Metta doesn't look away. It says, even this belongs. And in that gesture, healing doesn't just begin, it deepens. There's a reason this practice is called the tender blade, because true compassion cuts through pain with a precision that sharpness alone can't provide. When anger arises, most people tighten. They lash out or shut down. But with metta, you pause, you feel it fully, and instead of reacting, you wrap it in warmth. Not to make it disappear, but to stop it from controlling you. This is not indulgence, it's mastery. Compassion sees clearly. It doesn't sugarcoat or excuse, but it also doesn't add violence to the wound. Pain is not the enemy, it's the signal. It's the part of the body or mind saying, look here, I need you. Metta turns toward that voice with presence. No judgment, no impatience, just a steady hand, a calm gaze. And slowly, the part that once screamed begins to soften, because it finally feels heard, not by others, but by you. In Buddhist tradition, metta practice begins not with others, but with yourself. You sit quietly and repeat phrases like, may I be happy, may I be safe, may I be free from suffering, not because you believe them right away, but because your nervous system needs to hear them, especially if you've spent years believing the opposite. If you've internalized failure, guilt, self-hate, or unworthiness, then metta becomes a form of emotional reparenting. You're not just saying words, you're rewriting the inner script. And when the resistance shows up, as it will, you don't force it away. That too receives compassion. You say, "May even my resistance be met with kindness." This is how the practice deepens. Not by perfection, but by including everything. The tightness in your chest, the restlessness in your gut, the voices in your head. All of it sits in the circle of care. Compassion isn't just a warm feeling, it's a tool, a skill that gets sharper the more you use it. Over time, you learn to extend it even when it's hardest, especially when it's hardest. When someone lets you down, when you let yourself down, when grief comes back stronger than expected. You don't run, you don't collapse, you breathe, you open, you say, "This too is part of the path." And this path isn't about making pain smaller, it's about making your heart bigger, big enough to hold both joy and sorrow, kindness and rage, confusion and clarity. That's what metta does. It makes space. And in that space, the sharp edges of suffering start to soften. There's something profound that happens when you offer compassion to the parts of yourself you've judged most harshly, the moments you regret, the thoughts you hide, the choices you replay in the middle of the night. Metta doesn't erase the past, but it removes the poison, the shame, the self-punishment. What's left is not forgetfulness, it's forgiveness. Not because what happened was okay, but because holding on to it forever is too much weight for one soul to carry. And here's something most people don't expect. Metta isn't always gentle in tone. Sometimes it's fierce, protective. It says no with love. It walks away without bitterness. It speaks up without cruelty. This is not passive kindness. It's clarity with a backbone. It doesn't abandon others, but it also doesn't abandon you. It draws boundaries because it cares. It says, "This is where I end, and you begin." This is why healing through compassion works where logic and discipline fail. You can't bully your way out of pain. You can't guilt yourself into peace. You can only love your way there. And not the fantasy kind of love, the quiet, consistent kind, the kind that shows up even when it's hard, that whispers, "I'm still here," even when the old stories shout. Metta practice is also a lens. It changes the way you see others. Once you've learned to soften toward your own suffering, you can't help but notice it in others too. The anger of a stranger becomes less personal. The distance in a loved one becomes less threatening. You stop taking everything so seriously, because you know pain doesn't always wear a clear face. It often hides behind ego, behind silence, behind sharp words. Compassion lets you see through that armor and meet people where they are, not where they should be. And when that happens, relationships begin to change. Conflict becomes less of a battle and more of an invitation to listen. Disagreement doesn't feel like rejection. The need to win an argument fades, because your worth is no longer on the line. You don't need to prove anything when you already feel enough. And that feeling doesn't come from others, it comes from practice. Real metta is not conditional. It's not given only when things are good. It's offered even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. It says, "I won't abandon myself just because I'm in pain." It brings you home, again and again, to your breath, to your body, to the moment, and from that place, everything becomes more workable. Even physical pain begins to shift under the light of compassion. Instead of tensing, you learn to soften, to breathe into the sensation, not to like it, but to meet it. The muscles relax. The mind doesn't panic, and suddenly pain is no longer layered with fear. It becomes simpler, more bearable, because you're not fighting it anymore. You're in conversation with it, and what's true in the body becomes true in the heart. Emotional pain, when met with metta, stops spreading, stops infecting every corner of your life. Instead of turning your sadness into a personality, you cradle it, and slowly it begins to loosen, not because you forced it, but because you stayed with it. And presence, over time, becomes the balm that no medication could reach. Even when nothing changes externally, metta makes the inner world feel different, lighter, safer, more spacious. You start trusting your own mind again, not because it's perfect, but because it's being held, not punished. This is what metta teaches. Healing doesn't require self-improvement. It requires self-acceptance. The rest unfolds naturally. And when compassion becomes your default, not your reaction, but your intention, life becomes less threatening. You don't brace for impact all the time. You meet what comes with curiosity, not control. And that shift alone changes everything. Anxiety fades. Loneliness softens. Even old griefs stop pulling so hard, because you're no longer facing them alone. And the best part? Compassion never runs out. The more you give it, the more you have. It multiplies in silence. It grows in stillness. And it doesn't need applause. It's a quiet revolution happening inside your own heart. So tonight, as your body begins to relax and your breath slows, let this practice start small. A simple wish, a soft whisper in your own direction. May I be at ease. May I be kind to myself. May I feel safe inside my own skin. And if those words feel too far away right now, that's okay. Just stay with the tone, the intention, the willingness to open, even a little. Because sometimes the deepest healing doesn't come from doing anything. It comes from being present with what's already here, with warmth, with honesty, with kindness. And from the soft, steady work of compassion, where pain is no longer an enemy but a messenger, we now arrive at something stranger, the sensation that even after years, certain wounds still feel as sharp as the day they happened. A memory resurfaces, and suddenly the heart tightens, the breath shortens, the body reacts as if it's all happening again. This is the quiet illusion most people live inside without knowing, that time is straightforward, logical, reliable, but the mind doesn't follow the clock. It follows feeling, and healing these fresh-feeling old wounds means stepping beyond the timeline we were taught to believe in. In Buddhist practice, time is not seen as a fixed line from past to future. It's seen as something fluid, something shaped by attention. When the mind clings to a memory, that moment isn't behind us. It's here, now. Alive inside the nervous system, in the breath, in the muscle tension, in the quiet stories we keep telling ourselves without realizing. That's why some things still sting after decades. They weren't left in the past. They were carried forward. Healing them means not pushing them further away, but giving them space in the present. Mindfulness is the tool that opens that space. It doesn't try to erase the past. It just stops dragging it into every moment. And that alone changes everything. Because most suffering doesn't come from the past event. It comes from the mind's habit of replaying it, rehearsing what was said, imagining what could have gone differently, retelling the story with ourselves, stuck as the victim. But when we learn to sit with the memory without the story, we begin to loosen the grip time has on our nervous system. This is where Buddhist insight shines. It teaches that clinging is the cause of suffering, and one of the deepest forms of clinging is to time. This happened to me. This shouldn't have happened. This defines me. These are thoughts that trap the past inside the present. But the truth is, every moment is new. Every breath is untouched by what came before, unless we bring the weight of before into it. Mindfulness interrupts that cycle. It meets the moment as it is, not as it was. And in doing so, it begins to release the emotional residue that keeps old pain alive. Healing old wounds isn't about forgetting. It's about relating differently to what happened. Trauma embeds itself not just in memory, but in how we experience ourselves now. It changes the posture, the voice, the way we expect people to treat us. But these changes are not permanent. They're habits built on repetition, and habits can dissolve when awareness is present. When you notice how a certain memory still tightens your chest or makes your jaw clench, that noticing is already the beginning of release. Because the moment you become the observer, you're no longer just the one who was hurt. You're the one who sees the hurt. In Buddhist psychology, this process is called deconditioning. It's not suppression. It's not escape. It's meeting the conditioned response, fear, shame, anger, with awareness so consistent that the reaction loses its power. Every time you stay present with a memory without letting it hijack your identity, you weaken the link between past and present. You stop being defined by it. It becomes something that happened, not something that is happening. This is especially powerful for trauma survivors. Trauma is not just an event. It's the nervous system's inability to process that event as over. The body stays braced. The mind stays alert. Silence feels unsafe. Stillness feels like a trap. But when mindfulness is practiced with gentleness and patience, the body starts to feel time again. It starts to sense that what happened is not still happening. That now is different. That now is safe. And this shift can't be forced. It must be felt. Slowly, repeatedly, through breath, through awareness, through presence. This is why certain meditation techniques are so healing, not because they erase memory, but because they anchor the mind in now. Each time attention returns to the breath, it breaks the loop of the past. It reminds the body that this moment is not then. And the more you do this, the more trust the body begins to build, that it no longer needs to prepare for something that already ended, that it doesn't have to fight ghosts. Some people fear that releasing the emotional charge from old pain means losing part of themselves, that their past is part of their identity, and to soften it would be a betrayal. But Buddhism teaches the opposite, that healing is not betrayal. It's truth. It's the recognition that the story is not the self, that what happened doesn't need to define what's happening, that you can carry memory without carrying the wound. Mindfulness offers a way to meet those memories with kindness instead of collapse. You feel the ache arise, you stay present, you breathe, you watch the story the mind wants to tell, you don't argue with it, but you also don't believe it blindly. You sit, you allow, and then you release, and maybe it comes back tomorrow. That's okay, you meet it again. This is the gentle work of unbinding time, of freeing yourself from the mental loops that feel like facts. And here's something profound. When you meet a memory with enough presence, it begins to change. Not the event itself, but your relationship to it. Maybe you start to see the pain of the person who hurt you. Maybe you notice how you've healed more than you thought. Maybe you realize that you've been living in defense of something that's no longer a threat. This insight isn't intellectual, it's felt. And once it's felt, it can't be unfelt. Another powerful tool in Buddhist practice is labeling. When a painful thought arises, you don't follow it, you name it. Sadness, fear, judgment. This simple act creates space. It separates you from the thought. It reminds you, this is just an experience, not your identity. And when done consistently, it weakens the thought's grip. Because the mind wants to pull you into the movie of memory. But when you see it as just another mental event, it loses its power to control. You begin to notice patterns. Certain triggers that used to overwhelm you now become signals to slow down, to return to the breath, to the body, to now. And each time you do that, you untangle another knot in the thread of suffering, not by analyzing the past to death, but by creating enough safety in the present that the past no longer feels like a threat. The body starts to trust that it's okay to release. Muscles unclench. The breath moves freely. The mind stops chasing meaning and starts resting in presence. And in that resting, the stories soften. The blame dissolves. The fear becomes less loud. Not gone, just no longer the center of everything. This is how time heals, not because it passes, but because we stop holding on to it so tightly. We let each moment come and go without attaching it to what came before. We let now be now, instead of dragging the past into it like a shadow. And in that space, something incredible happens. Grief starts to move. Anger starts to lose its edge. Regret begins to unfold into wisdom. Because you're not hiding from your history, you're learning how to carry it differently, with presence, with kindness, with freedom. This isn't about pretending everything is okay. It's about seeing that even when it's not, you are still whole. That the pain didn't destroy you. That what happened does not get to be the author of your future. Because the more present you are, the more you remember who you are beneath the story. And that remembering is the beginning of peace. So, if there's a wound that still feels fresh, even after all these years, don't rush to fix it. Don't shame yourself for still feeling it. Just sit. Breathe. Let the moment hold it. Let awareness witness it. And trust that the healing doesn't happen in forgetting. It happens in returning, over and over, to now. Because now is where time opens, where the past loses its grip, and where you begin again. And from the gentle dissolving of time's illusion, where old pain begins to loosen its grip simply because the present stops inviting it, we step now into a quieter layer of suffering. The kind no one talks about. The kind that wears a smile, the kind that looks like achievement, like discipline, like ambition, but hides a deep fear underneath. It's the fear of not being enough, the silent ache behind success. And Buddhism, with its piercing simplicity, doesn't just recognize this hidden suffering, it knows exactly how to heal it. Because not all pain looks like struggle. Some of it hides inside resumes, inside gold medals, inside the praise that feels good for a moment and then vanishes like steam. It hides in the person who always says yes, in the one who can't sit still, in the one who keeps winning but never feels complete. It's easy to think healing is only for the broken, but some of the deepest wounds live in those who've achieved the most, because the world rewards performance, not peace. Buddhist insight reveals that craving is not always about material things. Sometimes it's the craving to be seen, to be valued, to feel safe through success. But that craving, when unchecked, becomes a trap. The more you achieve, the more you need. Because the emptiness it tries to fill isn't physical, it's internal. It's the subtle belief that if you stop proving your worth, it will disappear. That if you don't keep achieving, people will stop loving you. That your value lives in your effort. But effort isn't the enemy. Attachment is. Buddhism doesn't say to stop working hard. It says to stop tying your identity to what work brings. When effort becomes a form of self-validation, it stops being healthy. It becomes a disguise. You're no longer doing things, you're using things to protect the part of you that feels unworthy. And healing begins when you start to notice that split. That chasing the next goal isn't really about the goal. It's about escaping the silence that follows once the applause fades. One of the most profound teachings in Buddhism is that true happiness comes not from getting what you want, but from seeing clearly what you're attached to. Most overachievement is driven by attachment to image, to a story about who you should be. But stories are heavy. They demand maintenance. They leave no space for rest. And rest isn't a reward, it's necessary. Yet for many, resting feels unsafe, like letting the mask slip, like becoming invisible. This is where Buddhist practice offers something revolutionary, the space to be enough without earning it. Through mindfulness and self-inquiry, you begin to notice the patterns that run your life. The way you say yes to avoid guilt, the way you over-prepare to avoid judgment, the way your value feels conditional, not because it is, but because you've trained your nervous system to believe it is. Meditation is not just a stress relief tool, it's a mirror. In the silence of practice, all the internal habits start to show. The mental loop that says, keep going, or else. The voice that whispers, you're only as good as your last success. The feeling of panic when there's nothing to do. And instead of pushing those voices away, you learn to watch them, to sit with them, to see through them, not with force, but with curiosity. And slowly, the need to prove softens. Not because you've achieved more, but because you've realized the chase will never give you what you thought it would. The deeper part of you, the one that is watching all of this unfold, has never needed proof. It doesn't need praise, it doesn't need titles, it only needs presence. This is the part that Buddhism helps you reconnect with. The self that isn't trying to be someone, the self that simply is. In Buddhist terms, this is the movement from becoming to being, from "I will be enough when" to "I am already enough now." That doesn't mean you stop growing. It means growth is no longer driven by fear. It becomes an offering, not a defense. A natural unfolding, not a compensation. And this shift is what heals burnout. Because burnout isn't caused by hard work. It's caused by working from the wrong place, from pressure, from fear, from the need to maintain an image that was never real. But when your actions arise from presence, from stillness, from enoughness, they energize instead of deplete. They flow, because they're no longer trying to fill a hole. Many people who seem outwardly successful describe a strange emptiness, a quiet voice that says, "Why doesn't this feel better?" It's not that they're ungrateful, it's that they built a life on a false promise. That achievement would end the insecurity, that reaching the goal would quiet the fear. But fear doesn't dissolve through more success. It dissolves through presence, through learning how to sit with the fear instead of running from it, through realizing that fear only grows when you believe it. In Buddhist psychology, this is called the hungry ghost, a being with a huge belly and a tiny mouth, forever starving, never satisfied. This is the image of craving when it goes unexamined, and it lives in many who strive endlessly without rest. Healing begins when you stop feeding the ghost, when you stop letting fear drive the wheel, when you turn toward it and say, "I see you, I understand, but I'm not going to keep running for you." That doesn't mean the urge disappears overnight. But every time you pause, every time you act from wholeness instead of panic, you rewire something. You create space. And in that space, enoughness becomes more than a concept. It becomes a felt experience, one that doesn't need confirmation. This is why monks live simply, not because they hate achievement, but because they want freedom more. They know that external success is easy to chase and hard to satisfy, that the real work is learning to rest inside the moment, to be still, to let the heart open without earning it. And you don't have to give up your ambitions to do this. You just have to examine them. What are they serving? What are they protecting? What fear lives underneath them? This is not self-judgment. It's self-honesty, the kind that doesn't shame, but liberates. Because once you see that the fear of not being enough is just a thought, not a truth, it begins to lose its power. It still whispers, but you no longer obey. You no longer shape your life around it. You act from clarity, not compulsion, from purpose, not panic. Buddhism teaches that real power comes from inner stability, from the ability to sit in silence without needing to prove, from being able to walk away from a role without losing yourself, from finding joy not in achievement but in alignment, where your actions match your values, not your fears. This is not a rejection of success, it's a redefinition. Success becomes not what you have, but who you are when no one's watching. Not what you've built, but how much peace you feel while living in it. Not what people say, but how silent your mind is when the lights go off. And that kind of success. It's sustainable. It doesn't burn you out. It doesn't leave you empty. It feeds you. Because it's not about performance, it's about presence. So if you feel like you're always pushing, always trying, always behind some invisible bar. You're not broken. You've just been trained to measure yourself by an impossible standard, one that changes every time you meet it, one that was never meant to bring peace. Buddhism says, stop running, sit, breathe, listen, not to the world, to yourself, not to the fear, to the silence beneath it. There you'll find a different voice, one that says, you are never lacking, you are only lost in the chase. And from that place, the chase ends, and living begins. And from the hidden struggles of those who seem to have it all, the quiet wounds wrapped in praise and productivity, we now turn to something even more misunderstood, karma, a word thrown around like a spiritual scoreboard, used to explain luck, justify pain, or threaten justice. But in Buddhism, karma is not a punishment. It's not the universe out to get anyone. It's not a cosmic payback system. Karma is movement. Karma is cause and effect. Karma is medicine. And when it's seen clearly, it becomes one of the most powerful tools for healing. People often carry shame for things they can't even name. They assume they're broken, that life keeps punishing them, that certain patterns are just their fate. But Buddhism offers something different, a map, a way of seeing patterns not as permanent flaws, but as echoes. Karma isn't what happens to you. It's how your habits shape what happens next. And every moment you become aware of those habits, you are not being punished, you are being invited. Invited to respond differently, invited to break the loop, invited to heal. This view of karma removes the fear and brings in responsibility, the kind that empowers. Not everything that happens is your fault, but how you meet it becomes your practice. And karma isn't just stored in actions, it lives in thoughts, in intentions, in the subtle decisions made over and over again that build who we become. Karma is the momentum of those choices, and healing karma means interrupting that momentum with awareness. Many people ask why the same kinds of relationships keep showing up, or why certain emotional triggers never seem to go away. This is karma at work, not as punishment, but as repetition, not to hurt you, but to give you another chance to see clearly. And the moment you see clearly, the cycle begins to weaken, because karma doesn't demand perfection. It only asks for presence. In Buddhist psychology, karma is not just about this lifetime. But whether you believe in rebirth or not, what matters is the understanding that patterns persist until they're seen. Pain recycles until it's met with wisdom. Avoidance keeps the loop alive. But attention brings transformation. Karma is not a weight you drag. It's a pattern waiting to be rewritten. And every time you meet discomfort without escape, you change the ending of that pattern. One of the deepest misunderstandings about karma is that it's fixed. That once you've created bad karma, you're doomed. But karma is dynamic. It's flexible. It responds to the mind that meets it. A moment of deep awareness can shift years of unconscious behavior. A single act of compassion can dissolve layers of resentment. Because karma is not a prison. It's a path. And the path shifts with every step you take. This is why Buddhist practice always returns to mindfulness and right intention, The present moment is where karma bends. It's where new seeds are planted. And not all seeds bloom immediately. Some take time. But just as old patterns can feel inescapable, new patterns eventually become just as strong. You stop reacting the way you used to. You start responding with more space, and that space becomes freedom. To engage with karma as medicine means to stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this showing me?" That shift alone can release years of resistance. Because most suffering isn't caused by the event. It's caused by the story that the event shouldn't be happening. But karma is indifferent to preference. It's not moral, it's mechanical. Like planting a seed and getting a tree, it's not personal, but how you meet it becomes deeply personal. Because in meeting it differently, you stop being a passive character in your life and start becoming the author. And that authorship doesn't mean control, it means intimacy. You begin to know yourself in a deeper way. You notice the impulse before it becomes action, the feeling before it becomes anger, the craving before it becomes escape. And instead of going down the same path, you pause. You choose again, and in that pause, a new karma begins. Karma also explains why healing isn't linear, why old habits resurface, why insights fade. Because karma moves in layers. The deeper the groove, the more attention it needs. Not to be fixed in one grand moment, but to be softened over time with consistency. It's like slowly turning a large ship. You may not see change instantly, but the course shifts with every small movement. This view brings patience to the healing process. You stop expecting overnight transformation. You start trusting slow, grounded change. You begin to see every challenge not as failure, but as opportunity. Each emotional storm is a moment to anchor deeper. Each repetition is a doorway to wisdom. Karma keeps returning not to haunt you, but to free you. And it will knock until you answer with awareness. And here's the part most people miss. Karma isn't just about individual healing. It's collective. The patterns you shift in yourself ripple outward. The kindness you offer instead of the reaction you would have given, that's karma changing direction. The silence you hold instead of gossip. The boundary you set instead of people-pleasing. These are karmic pivots. And they affect everyone you touch. Your healing doesn't end with you. It becomes medicine for others. Buddhist texts often use the image of planting seeds. Unwholesome actions plant painful seeds. Wholesome ones plant liberating seeds. And every thought, word, and deed is a seed. You don't always see the fruit right away, but it's growing. And when you stop feeding the seeds of harm toward yourself or others, you start cultivating a garden of peace, one that eventually grows stronger than the weeds. And even when you do mess up, which you will, karma still isn't about punishment, it's about honesty. Seeing clearly what led to the pain. Meeting it with responsibility, not shame. Adjusting, learning, forgiving, and trying again. Karma doesn't demand flawless behavior, it demands conscious behavior. That's the difference. This reframing also removes the victim mindset, because karma doesn't blame, it reveals. And what it reveals is a kind of power most people forget they have, the power to choose differently, to break the pattern not with aggression, but with awareness, to end the cycle not with force, but with clarity. This is the heart of Buddhist healing. Transformation doesn't come from hating your past. It comes from meeting it so fully that it no longer defines your future. It comes from letting every moment become the medicine it was always trying to be. Even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. And this perspective also softens how we see others. We stop needing to punish people for their actions. We start seeing their karma too, not as excuse, but as explanation. We start understanding that people act from their own conditioning, their own wounds, their own unconscious loops. And just like us, they are learning, struggling, reacting, and perhaps trying to heal. This doesn't mean tolerating harm, but it does mean releasing hatred, because hatred is just more karma, and you don't have to carry it anymore. To live with karmic awareness means to become more intentional in everything. You don't just act, you watch the ripple. You speak, but you also pause. You move through the world, but with softness, with care, with attention to the seeds you're planting, not just for tomorrow, but for your own heart, here and now. And eventually, this awareness becomes natural. You don't need to force mindfulness. It becomes your baseline. The habits of unconscious reaction start to fall away. You don't chase healing anymore. You live it. Not in dramatic transformations, but in steady, grounded presence. In kind responses, in conscious decisions, in self-forgiveness, in space. This is karma as medicine, not something to fear, but something to trust. A living cycle that changes the moment you change. A force that reflects your intention, not your mistakes. A teacher that doesn't yell, but returns, over and over, until you finally listen. And then it becomes the very path you walk out of suffering with. And now, after seeing how karma is not a punishment, but a mirror, one that reflects our habits, choices, and patterns so that we may free ourselves, we come to a quieter, more fragile doorway in this journey. The ache of things ending, the weight of goodbyes, the lingering echo of what once was and will never be again. Grief. Not just from losing people, but from losing time, chapters, homes, versions of ourselves. And Buddhism doesn't tell us to move on. It invites us to look directly at loss, and in doing so, to touch something liberating, not in what remains, but in what cannot remain. There's an old Buddhist story about a monk who drinks tea from a simple clay cup. When asked why he handles it so carefully, he says, "Because I know this cup is already broken." He doesn't mean the cup is cracked. He means he understands its fate, and because he accepts that it will one day be gone, he treasures it more fully now. He drinks with full presence, knowing he is living in the middle of something that is passing. This is the broken cup principle. The recognition that everything we love will change, and everything we hold will slip away. Not because something is wrong, but because that is the nature of life. Grief feels unbearable because we resist this nature. The mind wants to freeze time. It clings to permanence. It creates the illusion that what brings us joy must always be here for us to stay whole. But Buddhism teaches that holding on to impermanent things as if they're permanent is what causes suffering. We suffer not because things change, but because we believed they wouldn't. We suffer because the mind demanded something the world could never give. And this teaching is not cold. It's not about being numb or detached. It's about softening the grip. because grief itself is not the problem. It's the refusal to let what has ended be gone. It's the mental replay, the what-ifs, the reaching back in time, trying to rewrite a script that will never change. And none of that brings the loved one back. None of that restores the moment. But it does keep us away from the healing that's already possible, right here, in the present. Impermanence is not meant to scare us. It's meant to wake us, to draw our attention into the now so completely that we stop taking this moment for granted. Because when we know something is temporary, we love it with more honesty. When we know it will end, we show up more fully. When we stop demanding forever, we start appreciating now. This shift dissolves some of the weight of grief. It doesn't erase the sadness, but it removes the added suffering of resistance. The mental story that says, this shouldn't have happened. Because the truth is, it did happen. The person did leave. The chapter did close. The cup did break. And when we stop arguing with that reality, we stop pouring energy into what can't be changed. That energy can now go into something else. Presence, remembrance, love that doesn't demand possession. This is how the Buddha taught his students to face death, not by pretending it didn't matter, but by training the mind to see what is true, that everything arises, changes, and falls away. And the more we resist this, the more we suffer. But the more we embrace it, the more we soften into a kind of peace that doesn't need things to stay. Grief becomes less violent when we stop needing it to make sense, when we stop looking for closure like it's a finish line. Buddhism doesn't offer resolution in the way people expect. It offers release, a way to hold what was lost without collapsing into it, a way to let love stay without needing the form it came in to return. It teaches that even when something ends, the connection doesn't vanish. It just changes shape. This is why many Buddhist rituals around death are not about forgetting, but about remembering with awareness, chanting the name of the deceased, offering food to the spirits, lighting candles not to bring back the past, but to honor what once was with reverence. There is no need to close the wound, only to hold it differently, to stop trying to erase it, and instead let it be part of the fabric of the present. One of the most freeing realizations is that grief does not mean something is wrong with you. It means something mattered. And pain is not a flaw, it's a reflection of care. But care becomes harmful when it refuses to let go. That's where impermanence becomes the medicine, not by taking away the grief, but by dissolving the illusion that it should have been otherwise. This also applies to more subtle forms of loss. Aging, watching parts of life fade away, realizing certain dreams will never happen, letting go of who we thought we would become. These are losses too, but the more we practice with the truth of change, the less these losses feel like failures. They begin to feel like openings, like invitations to meet ourselves where we actually are. Meditation is one way to do this. Sitting in stillness, you can feel things rise and fall inside you. Thoughts come. Feelings shift. Pain sharpens, then softens. In just 10 minutes of watching your breath, you witness the truth that nothing holds, and yet you remain. The awareness watching it all is not broken by any of it. It holds the storm without becoming the storm. And this is the part of you that can hold grief without drowning in it. The broken cup isn't a symbol of despair. It's a reminder of beauty, because what breaks can be loved fully. The sunset, precisely because it ends. The flower, precisely because it fades. The moment, precisely because it cannot be kept. And when you see this not as loss, but as essence, grief changes flavor. It becomes tender, not terrifying, gentle, not crushing. This is what allows people in deep mourning to also laugh, to feel both sorrow and gratitude at once. Because grief does not remove joy, it deepens it. When you stop expecting permanence, you start finding presence. And presence allows all emotions to coexist. You cry and you smile, you ache and you breathe, and through it all you remain aware, not untouched, but unbroken. This practice also brings healing to complicated grief, the kind where there were no goodbyes or where the relationship was painful. Impermanence helps us stop chasing perfect endings. It allows us to see that peace does not depend on resolution. Sometimes the ending was messy. Sometimes there were things left unsaid. Buddhism doesn't require those things to be tied up. It only asks that we see them clearly and stop carrying the weight of should have been. In this clarity, compassion grows, not just for others, but for ourselves, for the parts of us that grieve imperfectly, that sometimes still wish, that sometimes forget, that sometimes feel numb. All of that belongs. None of it is wrong. Grief is not a linear process, it's a tide, and when we stop fighting the tide, we find we can float. The broken cup principle also invites us to live differently, to stop holding people like possessions, to stop assuming tomorrow will always come, to say what we need to say, to listen fully, to hold a hand with our whole heart. Because we know the cup is already broken, not in a tragic way, but in a sacred way. It wakes us up. It reminds us this, right now, is what we get, and that knowing makes us more alive. And so, we begin to release our grip, not in bitterness, but in reverence. We thank the ones who left. We bless the time we had. We bow to what was, and we let it change. We let it move. We let it go. Not because we stop loving, but because we've learned how to love without needing to keep. This is not a detachment from feeling. It's a deepening of it. A willingness to feel without control. A trust in the truth that nothing we love is ever truly lost. It just flows back into the mystery it came from. And we, for a moment, got to witness it. This view can feel heavy at first, but over time, it becomes light. You stop holding life so tightly. You stop clinging to things that are already changing. You start appreciating more, stress less, love with fewer conditions, because you know the cup is already broken, and that knowledge doesn't make you anxious, it makes you grateful. Grief becomes less about waiting to feel better and more about learning how to feel deeply without fear. It becomes a quiet knowing that the pain will soften, not because it's fixed, but because it's felt, fully, honestly, without needing to make it prettier than it is. And from this place of quiet grief and soft peace, the journey continues. Because once you've accepted that everything changes, something else begins to appear, the space between. The moments of stillness not filled with memory or desire, the pause where true healing lives. That is where we go next. And after embracing the quiet truth of impermanence, after learning to hold grief without resisting the end, we now arrive at something far more subtle but just as powerful, A shift not in what we feel, but where we place attention. Because beneath every story the mind tells, between every thought that rises and falls, there is a gap, a space, and in that space something rare exists. A stillness that doesn't need words, a peace that isn't made from logic, a healing that happens not because we understand more, but because we finally stop interfering. Most people never touch this space because they're always inside the story, the running commentary, the voice that explains, judges, remembers, anticipates. Thought after thought stacking on top of each other like waves that never reach the shore. And because they're always inside it, they believe that's all there is. But the mind is not just the noise. The mind also contains silence, a background that holds the sound. And when you learn how to rest there, everything begins to change. Not because you've solved the problem, but because you've moved out of the storm and into the sky. This is the space between thoughts, the pause, the stillness just after a sentence ends, before another begins. It's not dramatic, it's not obvious, but it's real, and the deeper your attention goes, the more clearly you can feel it. In this space, healing doesn't need to be created, it unfolds naturally, because the body, the mind, the heart, they all know how to return to balance. They just need space to do it. Buddhism has long pointed to this space, though not always in words. Meditation is the gateway, not because it removes thoughts, but because it reveals what's always been beneath them. When you sit in silence and stop chasing every thought that appears, you begin to notice that thoughts are not continuous. There are tiny moments where they pause, where nothing is happening. And instead of rushing to fill that gap, you stay. You breathe. You rest. And what meets you there is not more thought, but awareness itself. Awareness doesn't speak. It doesn't analyze. It doesn't solve. It simply knows. And that knowing is what heals. Because most of our suffering doesn't come from the original emotion. It comes from the stories we build around it. We don't just feel sadness. We think about why we feel it, how long it's lasted, whether it should be gone by now. That's where the weight comes from. That's what exhausts us. But in the space between thoughts, none of that exists. There is no narrative, no identity, no past or future, just breath, just presence, just now. And now is where the nervous system begins to relax, where the breath finds its own rhythm, where the muscles start to soften, because nothing is being asked of you. There's no performance in awareness, no agenda. You don't need to prove anything to silence. You don't need to impress it. You simply let go. And the moment you let go, the mind begins to unwind. This is not avoidance. This is not distraction. This is returning to the place where the wound can breathe, where the pain is no longer being fed by thought. And once it's not being fed, it begins to dissolve. Not all at once, not like magic, but like ice melting in warm sunlight, slowly, naturally, without force. Many people think meditation is about stopping thoughts. It's not. It's about noticing that thoughts come and go and realizing that what sees them is not the same as what thinks them. You are not your thoughts. You are the space they appear in. And when you begin to identify with that space more than the content, you stop being dragged by every opinion, fear, or memory that arises. Even the most painful thoughts lose their grip when they are seen from space instead of from within the story. Anger, sadness, regret, they still arise, but they don't stick in the same way. They're not being reinforced. They're not being repeated. They pass through like wind through an open window, and your awareness remains unmoved. This practice trains the mind to become less reactive. You start to notice the gap before you speak, before you lash out, before you spiral, and in that tiny space, there's choice. The choice to respond instead of react. The choice to breathe instead of panic. The choice to stay in awareness instead of falling into the story. That's how transformation begins, not in grand gestures, but in subtle decisions made quietly, again and again. There's a kind of rest that happens here that sleep can't offer, because sleep doesn't stop the mind from running. But resting in awareness brings a stillness deeper than sleep. It's not just the body that rests, it's the identity. The constant need to be someone, to be right, to be safe, to be in control. All of that falls away in the space between thoughts, and what's left is simplicity, silence, clarity. This is also where creativity begins, where insight rises, not when the mind is crammed full, but when it's spacious. That's why solutions often appear when we're not looking for them. In the shower, on a walk, after meditation, because the mind, when not interrupted, knows how to reorganize. It knows how to find truth. It just needs silence to hear itself. The space between thoughts is also where trauma starts to release. Not through analyzing the past, but through not identifying with it. The more you rest in awareness, the more you begin to see the patterns that used to run you. You feel the fear rise, but now you don't follow it. You see the anger spark, but now you don't feed it. That simple act of staying is what unravels years of conditioning, because you're no longer acting from the pattern, you're watching it. And what's watched with kindness begins to shift. This is why spiritual teachers talk about spaciousness, not as a concept, but as an experience. The experience of living from the background, not the foreground, of letting thoughts pass like clouds without trying to hold on to any of them. And in that letting go, you realize something profound. Most of what you thought you had to fix never needed fixing. It just needed space. Most of the pressure wasn't real. It was built by thinking. Most of the fear wasn't current. It was projected. And in the absence of that thinking, peace returns, not because you created it, but because it was always there. Children know this space before they learn to worry, before they learn to explain themselves. They play, they cry, they laugh, and then they move on. No lingering commentary, no mental looping, just presence. And the healing we seek as adults is not to become someone new, but to return to that simplicity, to meet each moment without dragging the last one into it. And this can be practiced anywhere, not just on the cushion. While walking, you can feel your feet touch the ground and rest in the gap between steps. While eating, you can taste fully and rest in the pause between bites. Even in conversation, you can let go of the need to think about what you'll say next and rest in the silence after the other person speaks. These are all gateways to the space between thoughts. Over time, this space becomes a refuge, not a hiding place, but a home. A center you return to when the world gets loud, and the more you return, the more familiar it becomes. Eventually, you don't need to search for peace. It meets you because you've made space for it. And in that space, healing is no longer something you wait for, it's something you live. This is the quiet revolution. The deep shift from doing to being, from controlling to witnessing, from chasing to resting. And it all begins in the gap, the small, silent space that thought cannot touch. And now that we've entered this stillness, now that we've begun to live from the space rather than the story, we are ready to meet pain in a new way, not as something to avoid or suppress, but as something to stop owning. The next chapter reveals a deeper truth about suffering. Not that it is personal, but that it only feels that way because of how we relate to it. And now, from the stillness that lives between thoughts, where healing unfolds without being forced, we arrive at one of the most misunderstood truths in Buddhist practice, the truth about pain, not just how it arises, but how we relate to it. Because long before the mind reacts, long before we name the feeling or blame ourselves for it, something else happens. We personalize it. We call it my pain, my suffering. And in that quiet act of claiming, we turn something universal into something isolating. But what if pain isn't yours? What if it never was? Buddhism teaches that pain, dukkha, is a part of human life. Not a mistake, not a failure, not a punishment, but a condition of existence. It arises the way heat arises from fire, the way waves rise from the ocean. It isn't something you did wrong. It isn't something you alone carry. It's the texture of being alive. And the moment you stop making it personal, something profound happens. The shame begins to lift. The burden begins to lighten. The walls between you and everyone else begin to crack. Because when pain becomes the pain, it turns into something shared, something that no longer hides in the dark. It becomes part of the human story, not your private curse. And this shift, subtle as it seems, is one of the deepest sources of freedom on the path. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start realizing, "Oh, this is what being human feels like sometimes." The habit of personalizing suffering runs deep. We are taught to link our struggles to identity. If we feel anxious, we say, "I'm an anxious person." If we fail, we say, "I'm a failure." If someone leaves us, we think, "I'm not lovable." But these are interpretations, not facts. The pain itself doesn't speak in judgment. It just arises. It's the mind that assigns meaning, and that meaning often creates more suffering than the pain ever did. This is why the Buddha didn't teach the end of pain. He taught the end of suffering. Because pain is inevitable. Sickness comes, loss happens, plans fall apart, bodies change. But suffering is what we build on top of that. The resistance, the identity, the comparison, the idea that this pain means something about who we are. When we drop that layer, the pain is still there, but it becomes simpler, clearer, more spacious. In Buddhist teachings, dukkha isn't just physical or emotional discomfort. It's the sense of unsatisfactoriness that runs through everything when we try to control or cling. And one of the ways we cling is by making pain part of our identity. We replay it, defend it, feel guilty for it, hide it. But when you start to see pain as a natural part of being alive, you begin to meet it without so much fear. You don't need to run, you don't need to hide. You just say, "This too is part of the path." There's great compassion in this view, not just toward others, but toward yourself. Because once you stop blaming yourself for your pain, you stop punishing yourself for feeling it. You stop expecting to be someone who never hurts. And that expectation is where so much suffering hides. The belief that being spiritual means being above pain, that being healed means never breaking down. But Buddhism doesn't promise a painless life. It offers a path through the pain, not around it, not beneath it, but through. One of the most beautiful practices is to sit with pain, any kind, emotional or physical, and simply say, "This is the pain. Not my pain, not this always happens to me, just the pain." And then watch what happens. The muscles around the heart begin to relax. The mind starts to quiet. The story starts to dissolve. And all that's left is sensation, movement, breath, a wave rising and falling inside awareness. This shift doesn't erase the intensity, but it removes the loneliness. You stop feeling like the only one who's ever felt this way. You begin to remember how many others are feeling it too, right now. Somewhere, someone is also grieving, also hurting, also sitting awake in the middle of the night asking the same questions. And when you realize that, the heart begins to open. The pain becomes a bridge, not a wall. This is why compassion is so closely tied to wisdom in Buddhism. When you see your own pain clearly, without judgment, you can't help but see others with more softness. You stop expecting perfection. You stop needing people to act a certain way to feel safe. Because you know what it means to struggle, to feel lost. And that knowledge becomes your strength, not something you hide, but something you use. Pain, when not personalized, becomes a teacher. It shows you where you are attached, where you are afraid, where you still cling to control. But it also shows you how strong your awareness is, how deep your capacity for presence can go. Because the fact that you can sit and watch pain without collapsing into it, that is a miracle. That is growth. And pain, when met this way, often leads to insight. You start seeing what lies beneath it. Maybe the grief is pointing to a deep love. Maybe the fear is revealing a desire to protect something sacred. Maybe the anger is showing you a boundary that was crossed. These insights don't arise when we're running from pain. They arise when we stay, when we listen, when we stop turning it into a story about who we are. This doesn't mean we dismiss trauma or minimize difficulty. It means we stop turning them into identity. You can acknowledge what happened without becoming what happened. You can honor your pain without living inside it. This is the difference between clean pain and dirty pain. Clean pain is what life gives us. Dirty pain is what we add through resistance, shame, and storytelling. Buddhism helps us return to the clean version, the direct experience without the extra weight. And here's where this teaching becomes radical. Not only is your pain not personal, neither is your healing. When you heal, you contribute to the healing of others. Every time you meet pain with compassion instead of blame, you break a cycle. You create a new karmic possibility. You become a source of comfort, not because you offer advice, but because your presence is steady, because you know how to hold without fixing, because you've been there and you didn't collapse. Understanding dukkha as universal also prepares the mind for change. You stop being shocked when discomfort arises. You stop expecting the path to always be smooth. And this realism brings peace. Not the peace of constant ease, but the peace of knowing you can handle what comes. That you don't need life to protect you from all pain, you just need to stop turning pain into a prison. In practice, this means staying present with discomfort without labeling it. Sitting with sadness as sadness, with fear as fear. No need to attach a reason or explanation. No need to call it yours. And when you do this often enough, the pain loses its sharpness. Not because it's dulled, but because the self that clung to it begins to soften. You're no longer the one in pain. You're the one watching the pain. And that watcher is free. This is why the Buddha smiled. Not because life was always easy, but because he understood the nature of pain. And in understanding it, he stopped being afraid of it. That's what awakening means. Not that pain ends, but that it no longer owns you. So now, let this truth settle into your breath. Let it live in your posture. When discomfort arises, don't tighten. Don't say, "Why me?" Say, "This is the pain," and breathe. That's enough. That's more than enough. Because you're not alone. You never were. And from this awareness of shared pain, of collective suffering softened by presence, we step now into something unexpected. A way of healing that doesn't fight at all. A recovery not through effort, but through yielding. Through the quiet power of letting go of resistance itself. And now, after seeing how pain softens when it is no longer personal, when it's seen as a universal condition instead of a private sentence, we move into a truth even more disarming. Most suffering doesn't come from pain itself. It comes from fighting it. From the quiet war the mind wages against what's already here. From the pushing, the bracing, the tightening. And in Buddhism, this fight has a name. It's called resistance. And the moment that resistance stops, something else begins. Recovery. Not forced, not achieved, simply allowed. The mind is trained to fight discomfort. From an early age, it learns to react, to problem solve, to get away from whatever doesn't feel good. Pain, avoid it. Sadness, suppress it. Fear, overpower it. The result is a constant tug of war between what is happening and what the mind thinks should be happening. But no one wins that war. The pain stays. The fight drains energy, and the body never gets the chance to rest. Non-resistance is not giving up. It's giving space. It's the quiet choice to stop tightening around every experience, to let things be as they are without adding more to them. The pain comes, and you don't flinch. The thought arises, and you don't chase it. The emotion moves through, and you don't try to cage it. You allow, not because you agree with it, not because you like it, but because it's already here. And fighting it won't make it leave faster. This is where healing begins, not with control, but with surrender. Not the kind of surrender that collapses in defeat, but the kind that opens, the kind that says, "I trust that this too belongs." That doesn't try to fix the moment, but rests with it. That doesn't resist what is arising, but holds it without judgment. And this holding is what creates the conditions for true change. Because when resistance drops, the nervous system recalibrates, the breath deepens, the tension eases, and energy, once trapped in defense, becomes available for renewal. In Buddhism, this principle is known as acceptance. but not the shallow kind that says, "It is what it is," while still quietly resenting everything. True acceptance is active. It's embodied. It's a deliberate softening, a conscious yes to the reality of this moment. Not forever, just now, just this breath, just this emotion, without needing it to be different. And the beauty of non-resistance is that it doesn't ask you to like what's happening. It simply asks you to stop making it worse. Because every time you resist, you double the suffering. There's the original discomfort, and then there's the stress of not wanting it. That second layer is optional, and non-resistance removes it. One of the most direct practices in this teaching is to notice where the body tenses in response to emotion. Sadness comes, and the chest tightens. Fear arises, and the stomach knots. Anger flares, and the jaw clenches. These are physical signs of resistance. And you don't have to analyze them. You only have to notice them and soften. The emotion doesn't need to go away, but the body no longer needs to fight it. This is how you train the nervous system to respond instead of react, to stay instead of flee. This principle is also deeply tied to impermanence. When you understand that all things pass, you stop trying to escape the ones that hurt. You begin to trust that every emotion, no matter how intense, has a natural lifespan. It will rise, it will peak, it will dissolve, but only if you don't interrupt it. Resistance interrupts. It traps. It freezes the emotion in place. But allowing it to move, like weather passing across the sky, returns you to flow, and healing needs flow. It needs movement. It cannot happen in a clenched state. That's why non-resistance isn't passive. It's profoundly healing, because it opens the system. It lets the blocked energy move. It lets the mind breathe again. And this breathing is not just metaphorical, it's physiological. Deep, non-resistant breath activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural healing mode, the mode that digests, restores, and repairs. Resistance is exhausting. It tells you to be on guard at all times, to question every feeling, to deny vulnerability, but non-resistance allows you to sit with what is and discover that it's not as dangerous as it seemed. You realize that the sadness doesn't drown you, the fear doesn't destroy you, the anger doesn't define you. They pass when you stop gripping them. Even chronic patterns start to shift when met with non-resistance. The shame that always shows up after conflict, the guilt that trails every boundary, the anxiety that rises with silence. These aren't enemies, they're habits, and habits dissolve not through force, but through understanding, through patience, through the steady choice to stay open even when it hurts. And staying open doesn't mean you say yes to abuse. It doesn't mean you tolerate harm. Non-resistance is internal. It's about how you meet the moment, not how you let others treat you. In fact, non-resistance often leads to stronger boundaries, because when you're not fighting yourself, you have more clarity, more presence, more ability to speak from truth rather than from reactivity. This principle also applies to healing from trauma. The instinct is to push the pain away, to armor up, to avoid. But trauma doesn't dissolve through avoidance. It needs to be met, gently, consistently, without pressure. Non-resistance is the safe container that allows this. It says to the wounded parts, "You're welcome here. You don't have to go away to be loved." And when those parts feel safe, they begin to relax. They begin to release their grip on your behavior. The flashbacks ease. The tension unwinds. Not because the past is changed, but because the present is no longer at war with it. Meditation becomes the training ground for this. You sit, thoughts arise, emotions surface. And instead of pushing them away, you notice them. You don't get lost in them, but you don't fight them either. You simply watch, with softness, with kindness. And in that watching, the system starts to trust again. Trust that it doesn't have to defend itself every moment. Trust that experience can come and go without being overwhelming. This trust is what allows the body to heal, because the body remembers everything, every moment of fear, every act of bracing, every time it wasn't safe to feel. Non-resistance is how you tell the body, "It's safe now." And the body believes you, not through words, but through experience, through breath, through presence, through the absence of pushing. Even in daily life, non-resistance can be practiced. A delay happens, you soften instead of clenching. Someone interrupts you, you pause instead of snapping. You feel sadness rising in a meeting, you allow it to exist quietly, without making it wrong. These are the moments that rewire you, that teach the mind and body a new way to live. And this new way is not about perfection. It's not about being above emotion. It's about being so present that nothing needs to be suppressed, that everything is allowed, that the full range of human experience can move through you without sticking, without damaging, without defining. This is what it means to live without resistance, to walk through the fire and not be burned. Not because you've numbed out, but because you've stopped fighting flames that were never meant to consume you. They were meant to pass. And when they pass, what's left is clarity. A quietness that doesn't come from winning a battle, but from never needing to fight it in the first place. A peace that wasn't earned, but revealed. Because peace is what's underneath resistance, always has been. So now, let your breath be soft. Let your body relax. Let the emotion rise without interruption. You don't need to chase it. You don't need to understand it. Just let it be. And in letting it be, you let yourself heal. And now, after resting in the soft strength of non-resistance, after watching the mind unclench and the body slowly begin to trust, we step into something deeper, something quieter than even silence. A journey with no map, no destination, no visible path. It doesn't ask for action, movement, or change on the outside. It asks for presence. The kind that shifts everything not by doing more, but by being here more fully. This is the inner pilgrimage, the most radical healing path of all, not because it goes somewhere, but because it leads you back to what was never missing. In a world obsessed with progress, presence is overlooked. We are taught to move, to improve, to upgrade our lives with constant motion. And yet, in Buddhist tradition, the greatest transformation often happens through stillness. Monks walk slowly, deliberately, sometimes in circles, not to reach a place, but to dissolve the one inside who needs to get somewhere. The real journey is not forward, it's inward, and it begins by stopping. Presence is not sitting still on the outside while racing on the inside. It's not pretending to be calm while planning 10 steps ahead. It's the full arrival of attention in this moment, with nothing held back. It's when breath, thought, body, and awareness meet in one place, not as a performance, but as a return to what's always been true. This, right here, is enough. Healing without movement sounds impossible to the busy mind. We think pain must be solved through action. That change must be visible to count. But Buddhism reveals something different. Presence itself heals, because presence is the only state where wholeness can be felt, not in remembering, not in hoping, in being. When the mind is not chasing, the heart begins to open, and the moment you stop reaching forward or falling back, something astonishing is revealed. You are already whole. This kind of healing doesn't erase pain. It holds it in a new way. The anger, the fear, the grief, they still arise, but presence doesn't flinch. It doesn't escape. It doesn't layer more pain on top. It watches, it breathes, it stays. And this staying is what breaks the old cycles. The ones that said, run when it hurts. The ones that said, fix what you feel. The ones that said, you're not there yet. Presence doesn't agree with any of them. It knows that this moment is enough to begin and enough to end. The inner pilgrimage begins when you choose not to leave the moment, when you decide to bring your full attention to the ordinary, your breath, the warmth in your hands, the weight of your body on the seat. Nothing needs to change. No insight needs to arise. The practice is not to become someone else. It's to remove what blocks the truth that you are already someone sacred. In meditation, this is often what surprises people most, that by doing nothing, so much arises. The grief we forgot about, the longing we covered up with goals, the peace we didn't know was available. Stillness doesn't create these things, it reveals them. And in that revelation, the healing begins, slowly, gently, not through willpower, but through presence. You may notice restlessness, the part of the mind that wants to get up, check something, achieve something. That's part of the journey too. Presence doesn't reject it, it watches it. And in that watching, the restlessness begins to lose its grip. The more you see your patterns without judgment, the more those patterns unravel, because they feed on avoidance, and presence doesn't avoid. This is why monks live lives that look so still from the outside, not because they've given up on life, but because they've chosen to meet it without filters. They walk slowly, eat slowly, speak rarely, not to withdraw, but to fully engage, to hear the subtleties, to meet the moment naked of distraction. Their movement is deliberate, their attention whole, and that whole attention is the most powerful healing force we have. In daily life, this practice looks like simplicity. Drinking a cup of tea without thinking of the next task, taking a breath before responding, watching the sky without needing to take a photo. These are not small acts, they are acts of devotion. Devotion to reality as it is, not how the mind wants it to be. And in that devotion, the mind softens, the heart opens, the need to escape begins to fade. Presence also changes how we relate to our past. The old stories lose power when they're not rehearsed. The wounds stop defining us when we stop returning to them with resistance. Not because we forget, but because we meet them with new awareness. The inner pilgrimage doesn't walk away from the past. It walks through it, step by breath-filled step, until there's nothing left but stillness. And in this stillness, forgiveness becomes possible. Not as an act of the will, but as a natural opening. You stop needing the past to be different because you're no longer trapped in it. You stop needing others to validate your story because you've made peace with silence. You stop needing proof of your worth because presence proves it every moment you stay. Presence also brings clarity. You start to see what matters, not because someone told you, but because the noise begins to fall away. You stop chasing what doesn't feed you. You stop entertaining what drains you. Because when you are deeply present, the body tells the truth. The breath shortens when you betray yourself. The stomach tightens when you ignore your intuition. And presence gives you the courage to listen. This listening is sacred. It connects you to something deeper than logic. A knowing that doesn't shout. A wisdom that arrives in quiet moments. And the more you live in presence, the more you trust this knowing. You stop waiting for permission. You stop needing certainty. You simply follow the thread of what feels whole. And that thread always leads back to now. Even the body begins to change in presence. Tension releases. Energy returns. Illness softens. Because healing isn't just about medicine. It's about how we live. And living in presence returns the body to a natural rhythm. One where the breath is full, where the heart is calm, where the immune system is no longer in fight or flight, where rest becomes sacred, not lazy, where sleep becomes deep, not filled with mental clutter. The inner pilgrimage asks you to give up nothing except your absence. It doesn't care what you do for a living. It doesn't care how spiritual you look. It asks only that you show up, fully, and keep showing up, even when it's hard, even when it's boring, even when nothing changes. Because in presence, everything changes, not in form, but in texture, in meaning, in depth. You begin to feel a subtle joy, not the kind that explodes with excitement, but the kind that hums quietly beneath the noise, the joy of enoughness, of being here without needing more, the joy of sitting on the earth and feeling your feet, of hearing a bird and not needing to name it, of being alone and not feeling lonely, because presence makes you whole again, and when you're whole, nothing is missing. This is the transformation, not from broken to fixed, but from scattered to whole, from absent to here, from seeker to knower, and all of that happens without moving an inch. So now, stay with this. Let presence deepen. Let the mind slow. Let the breath lead. You don't have to go anywhere to arrive. You don't have to fix anything to be well. You don't have to do more to deserve rest. This is the path that circles back to itself, the one that ends where it began, the one that shows you that peace was never somewhere else. And from this deep well of stillness, from the healing that blooms not by chasing, but by staying, we turn now to one of the most powerful skills on the path. The ability to witness emotion without being consumed by it, to hold space when the storm rises, and to become the calm center rather than the wind. And now, from the still ground of presence, where nothing outside needs to change for healing to begin, we step into one of the most turbulent places inside the human experience: the emotional flashback. That sudden wave of fear, shame, rage, or helplessness that seems to come from nowhere. It pulls the body into fight or freeze, pulls the mind into panic, and makes the heart believe that something is wrong right now. But often, nothing is wrong in the present. It's the past, returning through the body. And this is where mindfulness becomes more than calm. It becomes survival. Emotional flashbacks are not always obvious. They don't need a trigger that makes sense. They don't arrive with a full memory. They slip in through sensation: the tightening throat, the rushing heartbeat, the need to disappear. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of old pain that never had space to finish moving. And when they rise, the untrained mind reacts. It fights. It shuts down. It lashes out. It believes it is under threat. But healing begins the moment you can notice the flashback without becoming it. Mindful distance doesn't mean pulling away from your emotions. It means stepping back just far enough to see that you are not the emotion. You are the awareness noticing it. And that space is where healing happens. In that space, you have the power to respond instead of react, to hold instead of collapse, to breathe instead of bracing. This isn't detachment, it's clarity. It's the ability to stay grounded even when the storm hits. The body holds old experiences in muscle, breath, and reflex. Trauma isn't just a memory, it's a pattern of reaction. When the body senses even a small similarity to a past threat, it activates protection, and the mind interprets that activation as a present danger. That's why emotional flashbacks feel so real. But through practice, you can teach the body to pause, to look around and say, "Right now, I am safe." This pause is not intellectual, it's somatic. The body must feel it, and it begins with awareness. One of the first steps in working with emotional flashbacks is recognizing their signature. Maybe your chest tightens, maybe your hands go numb, maybe your voice disappears. Naming these patterns helps you catch them sooner. And when you catch them, you can bring in presence. You can say, "This is an old pattern. This is not happening now. I can stay here." Staying doesn't mean doing nothing. It means choosing your action consciously. Instead of spiraling into self-blame, you bring attention to your breath. Instead of yelling or shutting down, you pause and place a hand on your chest. This hand is not to fix, it is to remind. You're not alone, you're not unsafe, you're not broken. Over time, these gestures create new associations in the nervous system. The flashback still comes, but now it meets a different environment. One filled with kindness and space. Another powerful practice is grounding through the senses. When the mind gets hijacked by old stories, the body can bring you back. Name 5 things you see. Feel the weight of your feet. Hear the quiet sounds around you. These anchors reconnect you to the present moment. They tell the body, we're not back there, we're here, and here we can breathe. Mindful distance also means allowing the emotion to move without needing to explain it. Often, the mind wants to understand before it allows. It wants a story, a reason. But emotion doesn't need to be understood to be valid. You can feel rage without knowing its roots. You can cry without a clear cause. The important thing is that you witness it without merging into it. You don't become the rage, You don't become the fear, you stay the observer. This observation must be gentle, not a cold analysis, but a warm presence. Imagine watching a storm outside a window. You don't need to fix the weather, you don't need to judge it. You just stay safe inside, letting it pass. This is how mindful distance works. You remain aware, curious, kind, and through this, you begin to rewire your nervous system. You teach it that intense emotions are not threats. They are waves, and waves pass. Flashbacks often make people feel ashamed. Why am I still reacting like this? But shame adds another layer of suffering. In mindfulness, there is no shame. There is only noticing. Ah, the storm is here again. You don't scold the sky for raining. You acknowledge it. You make space for it. You give it time to move through. That's all healing asks for. Time, space, presence. Sometimes the flashback won't end right away. That's okay. The goal is not to stop it. The goal is to stay present with it, without turning it into identity. You can say, a part of me is afraid, instead of, I am afraid. You can say, sadness is moving through, instead of, I am broken. Language matters. The way we speak to ourselves shapes the nervous system's response. It either creates more fear or more freedom. The more you practice this, the more you'll notice your capacity expanding. What used to overwhelm now becomes manageable. What used to trigger shutdown now invites inquiry. And this expansion is not just mental, it's physical. The breath becomes fuller, the posture softens, the muscles stop anticipating attack. This is not imagined healing, it's real. And it starts with just one moment of not reacting. Journaling can help with this. Not to analyze, but to track patterns. To write what happened in the body, what story the mind told, what action you took. Over time, you'll see how your awareness grew. You'll see fewer reactions, more responses, fewer spirals, more pauses. And these are the signs of recovery, not perfection, but presence. Sometimes you will still react. That's not failure. That's part of the path. The goal is not to never get triggered. The goal is to shorten the time between trigger and presence. To recover faster, to come home to yourself sooner. Every moment you do that is a step toward freedom. The inner witness grows stronger each time you return. It becomes your steady companion. You feel fear rise, and the witness says, stay. You feel anger boil, and the witness says, breathe. You feel the urge to run, and the witness says, this will pass. And it does. Not because you forced it, but because you didn't fuel it. This is the power of mindful distance. It gives you your life back. It gives you choice. In the middle of the storm, it says, you don't have to become this. You can stay with this. And that staying, moment by moment, rewrites the nervous system. From panic to peace, from reactivity to response, from survival to sovereignty. And now that this foundation is laid, now that the storms are no longer gods but weather, we're ready for a deeper release. Not through the mind, but through ritual. Through letting go of who we thought we were. Through burning the old self, not with violence, but with reverence. And now, from the calm center of mindful distance, where the storm no longer controls you, but simply passes through, you arrive at something sacred. A point of no return, not because anything is taken from you, but because something inside is finally ready to be released. The old self, the worn-out identity that formed in reaction to pain, fear, expectations, or survival. The one you built to protect yourself, to be accepted, to make sense of a world that often didn't. But now, that identity is too small, and holding on to it hurts more than letting it go. In Buddhist tradition, rebirth is not just about what happens after death. It's what happens in the middle of life. A conscious release of who we used to be, followed by a quiet stepping into who we've always been underneath. This is not metaphor. It is ritual. It is real. The self is not solid. It is made of choices, habits, memories, beliefs, and all of those can be unlearned. The fire doesn't burn the body. It burns the story. It turns the false into ash, and from that ash, something honest grows. Releasing the old self begins with seeing it clearly, not with judgment, but with truth. The roles you've played, the masks you've worn, the lies you believed about what makes you lovable, worthy, safe. Maybe it was the high achiever, the fixer, the quiet one, the fighter. Maybe it was the person who never showed pain. Maybe it was the one who always said yes. These identities served a purpose. They helped you survive. But now, they block the very peace you're trying to find. They whisper stories of limitation, of fear, of not enough. And the more you carry them, the heavier they become. This is where ritual becomes healing, not because it changes the outside, but because it gives the inner world a clear turning point. In Buddhist cultures, symbolic acts are used to mark the end of something. Lighting a candle to say goodbye, chanting to honor what is no longer needed, walking in silence to represent a crossing. These gestures are not superstitions. They are anchors. They show the nervous system, the mind, and the heart. We are done with this. We are stepping forward. One such practice is writing a letter to the self you are ready to let go of, speaking directly to the identity that no longer fits. You thank it for its service. You name what it did to keep you safe. And then you release it. You can burn the letter. You can bury it. You can speak it aloud under the sky. The act itself is simple, but the impact is deep. The mind remembers what the body feels, and when you physically release a symbol of your old self, you begin to believe the shift. Another practice is the inner funeral. Not morbid, not sad, but reverent. You close your eyes and picture the version of yourself you are ready to release. You see their posture, their expression, the weight they carry. You bow to them, not with resentment, but with gratitude. And then, in your mind, you let them return to the earth. You say goodbye. You breathe. And when you open your eyes, you don't rush. You sit in the stillness of what now remains. And what remains is not emptiness. It's space. That space is where the new self begins to grow. Not something you create with effort. Something that arises naturally when the old constraints fall away. You don't have to know who you are yet. You just have to stop pretending to be who you're not. The clarity will come. But first, the fire. First, the goodbye. In Buddhist teaching, this is part of the cycle of samsara and liberation. The wheel of becoming turns when we cling to form, to identity, to fixed roles. Liberation begins when we see that none of it lasts, that the self is a process, not a product, that what you are is not the name you answer to or the history you carry. It is the awareness behind all of it, timeless, unwounded, vast. Rebirth is not a goal. It is a return, a falling away of the false. And it can happen 1,000 times in one life. Every time you let go of an old reaction, that's a rebirth. Every time you speak truth instead of pleasing, that's a rebirth. Every time you choose rest over proving, or silence over control, or presence over performance, you are being born again. This doesn't mean the old self won't try to return. It will. It's familiar. It's loud. But now, you'll see it coming. You'll recognize the script, the tone, the urge to shrink or harden or impress. And you'll pause, you'll breathe, you'll remember. I've burned this before. I don't need to wear it again. This kind of healing takes time, not because it's slow, but because it's deep. Each layer of identity was built over years. It deserves to be released with care. You don't need to rush. You only need to stay honest. When something feels tight, examine it. When a behavior feels exhausting, question it. When an old belief speaks, ask if it still serves you. This is the work, not of becoming, but of shedding. And shedding is not loss. It is return to simplicity, to truth, to the quiet voice that was buried under performance. That voice doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It waits. And when you finally listen, it says, "Welcome back." In some Buddhist monasteries, novices shave their heads as a symbol of release. Not because hair is bad, but because even small attachments can reveal the ego. Letting go is never about the thing itself. It's about what it represents. Control, identity, story. And every time you let go, something inside becomes lighter. You don't need to live in a monastery to do this. Every day offers small chances to release. Saying no when you used to say yes. Speaking truth when you used to hide. Resting when you used to hustle. These are acts of spiritual rebellion, not loud, but powerful. They say, the old script is no longer my master. And from these acts, a new self is born. Not the perfect self, not the one with all the answers, but the one who is real, present, soft, alive. You stop measuring your worth in outcomes. You stop seeking validation from outside. You become your own witness. And that witnessing is what changes everything. The more you burn the false self, the more space you make for joy. Not the kind that needs a reason, the kind that rises quietly when you are fully here. The kind that exists not in achieving, but in being. And being, when not weighed down by masks, feels like peace. This is not about erasing the past. It's about honoring it while no longer living inside it. You take the lessons, you bow to the pain, and you walk forward, bare, honest, free. So now, take a breath. Feel the old stories loosening, the old roles softening, the pressure lifting. You don't need to be who you were yesterday. You don't need to be who they expect. You only need to be here, fully, and let presence do the rest. Because from here, healing doesn't stop. It deepens. The old self was never the final version. And now that it's been laid to rest, what rises is not a better version, but a truer one. And now, from the quiet release of the old self, from the symbolic funeral that frees what no longer belongs, we arrive somewhere even deeper, somewhere older than language, older than story. The body, not the body as appearance or structure or label, but as experience, as sensation, as the place where everything unresolved waits to be felt. Because while the mind spins in narrative, the body tells the truth. And it doesn't speak in words. It speaks in tension, numbness, pressure, stillness. It speaks through presence, if we know how to listen. Vipassana meditation is one of the oldest Buddhist practices, and at its core, it is not about thought, it's about seeing clearly, not with the eyes, but with attention. Vipassana means insight, and it's cultivated by watching the truth of the present moment, especially within the body. Body scanning is one of the main ways this is done. You sit, you close your eyes, and you bring your attention inch by inch to each part of the body. Not to change it, not to analyze it, but to feel it, directly, honestly, without resistance. This may sound simple, but for many it's the first time they've ever truly listened to their body without trying to fix it or flee from it. Trauma lives in the body, not just as memory, but as held breath, tight shoulders, clenched jaws, collapsed chests. It doesn't speak in logic, it speaks in discomfort. And when we meet that discomfort with narrative, we loop. But when we meet it with awareness, it begins to soften. The body scan is not a relaxation technique, although it may result in deep rest. It's a practice of returning to the actual sensations of the present moment without judgment. You bring attention to the top of your head. You notice what's there. Maybe warmth, maybe tingling, maybe nothing. Then you move to your face, your neck, your shoulders, pausing in each area to feel whatever is there. Noticing tension without calling it bad. Noticing numbness without trying to fix it. Just meeting it as it is. Over time, this practice reveals how much of your day is spent disconnected. Walking without feeling your feet. Eating without tasting. Living in the mind while the body carries 1,000 silent stories. The scan is a way of coming home. It is a gentle invitation to feel what was once too much to feel, but now, with presence, it can be touched safely, slowly, with kindness. When trauma is stored in the body, it doesn't ask for analysis. It asks for space. When a child is afraid, they don't need a speech. They need to be held. And your body, in many ways, is that child. It doesn't need you to figure it out. It needs you to stay, to breathe, to stop running. Through Vipassana, you begin to see that pain is not constant. It fluctuates, that even discomfort has space inside it, that behind every sensation is a field of awareness that is untouched. The pain is in the body, but the awareness is beyond it. And that awareness, that vastness, is where healing begins. Not by pushing the pain away, but by seeing that you are not only the pain, you are also the one watching it. This shift is subtle, but powerful. A tightness in the chest once meant panic. Now it means pause. A heaviness in the stomach once meant dread. Now it means listen. You stop treating the body as a problem. You start treating it as a teacher, and every sensation becomes part of the lesson, not to interpret, but to witness. Over time, areas that were numb begin to feel again. Places where emotion was stored begin to release, not all at once, sometimes in tears, sometimes in warmth, sometimes in stillness that feels sacred. This is the body speaking in its natural language, and the more you listen, the more fluent you become. Body scanning also teaches impermanence in the most direct way. You notice that no sensation stays the same. Pain rises, crests, fades. Tingling becomes warmth. Numbness opens. Everything changes. And the more you see this, the less you cling to comfort, the less you fear discomfort. You stop needing to hold on to what feels good. You stop needing to run from what feels hard. You become steady, not because life is easy, but because your attention is strong. This steadiness is the fruit of the practice, not numbness, not distance, but a soft, stable awareness that doesn't flinch, that says, yes, this too, that holds without tightening, that breathes without bracing, that knows the body is not the enemy, it is the doorway. Many people spend years looking for healing outside. Books, therapies, conversations, and these can help. But the body is always here, always available, always offering the chance to return. You can practice vipassana anywhere, sitting, lying down, standing in line, bringing your attention to your hands, your feet, your breath, noticing, not judging, just being with. And the more you practice, the more the body trusts you. It begins to open. It begins to guide. You feel when you're out of alignment. You sense when you're holding something unspoken. You catch the subtle contractions that once went unnoticed. And in catching them, you soften. You choose differently. Not because you've memorized a rule, but because you've learned how to feel what's real. This level of intimacy with the body brings clarity to every part of life. You start to notice which environments make your shoulders tighten, which conversations close your chest, which habits numb your senses. And you don't need to judge these things, you only need to notice. And through that noticing, you begin to reshape your life to support your healing, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Vipassana also helps dissolve the sense of separation. When you feel your whole body, you stop living from the neck up. You stop being a floating head. You become whole. And in wholeness, the false boundaries between me and them begin to fade, because the awareness that feels your pain is the same awareness that would feel theirs, not conceptually, viscerally. This is why body scanning isn't just healing, it's humbling. You start to see how much tension you carried unconsciously, how many emotions were buried in the flesh, how often you left yourself without knowing it. And instead of shame, you feel gratitude, that you found your way back. That presence is possible. That peace doesn't come from perfection, but from attention. Sometimes, during the scan, old memories may rise, flashes of past events, echoes of past wounds. This is natural. The body holds memory, not always in images, but in sensation. And when it feels safe, those sensations surface. Your job is not to fix them. It's to stay with them, to breathe with them, to let them unfold and fade like waves reaching shore. And when they fade, you don't rush to analyze. You rest. You feel the afterglow, the quiet that follows release, the new space where pain once lived. And that space becomes your anchor, your proof that healing happened, not through effort, through awareness. This practice also deepens sleep, because when the body feels seen, it stops holding tension in the night. It no longer needs to guard against the day, and when you scan before bed, the breath slows, the system unwinds, the body knows it is safe to rest. Vipassana is not a performance. There is no perfect scan. Some days your mind will wander. Some days emotions will rise. Some days you'll feel nothing. This is all part of the practice. You don't need to succeed. You only need to show up consistently, kindly, curiously. And as you do, the relationship with your body becomes one of partnership. You stop forcing it to carry what it no longer needs. You stop blaming it for feeling. You start thanking it for speaking. And this gratitude itself becomes healing. So now let yourself settle. Feel the weight of your body, the contact with the surface beneath you, the rise of the breath, the subtle movement in the chest. This is not background noise. This is the practice. You are here, fully, gently, without escape. And now, from the raw honesty of the body, where tension has spoken, emotion has surfaced, and presence has listened, we move into something even more subtle, something that cannot be touched or scanned or mapped, yet it is always there. The Dharma, not as a set of rules or teachings, but as a living truth. A force that moves beneath the surface of everything. A medicine that doesn't need to be chased, memorized, or micromanaged, because once it's absorbed, it keeps working, quietly, deeply, even when we stop thinking about it, even when we sleep. Most healing paths in life are effort-driven. We try, we push, we plan our recovery, force progress, measure results, and often that effort is what slows us down. It turns healing into another goal, another self-improvement project. But the Dharma, the natural law of reality that the Buddha pointed to, doesn't require that kind of control. It works differently. It teaches that when we stop interfering, when we stop trying to fix ourselves every second, we actually start to heal faster. Not because we did more, but because we got out of the way. Trusting the Dharma means learning how to let go without giving up. It's understanding that once a seed of truth is planted, it grows in its own time. You don't have to hover over it. You don't have to pull at its roots. You create the right conditions like water and sun, and then you allow, you rest, and the wisdom you've absorbed begins to do its work, naturally, invisibly, reliably. This is not blind faith. It's a different kind of knowing, a knowing that arises after direct experience, after feeling presence settle your nervous system, after watching non-resistance dissolve old pain, after seeing identity fall away and peace rush in. Once you've touched that, something changes. You begin to sense that the healing isn't coming from your effort. It's coming from alignment, from truth, from Dharma. And Dharma doesn't need to be memorized. It needs to be lived, felt, trusted. Just like gravity, it's always pulling you back to center, even when you forget, even when you wander, even when you fall back into fear. The Dharma is patient. It keeps working quietly beneath the noise of doubt and distraction. You might think nothing is changing, but the roots are growing, the soil is shifting, and one day something rises and surprises you. A new reaction, a moment of clarity, a peace that wasn't there before. That's the Dharma in motion. One of the greatest teachings of the Buddha was that the path to liberation is already within us. The Dharma is not external. It is not something added. It is something uncovered. It is the natural intelligence of life itself. And the more you trust it, the more you notice how it shows up in unexpected ways. A sudden release during meditation, a deep breath that happens without planning, a flash of insight in the middle of a conversation. These are not random. They are signs that your system is unwinding, that the teachings are landing, that the inner healing is activating. Just like medicine continues to work after you've swallowed it, the Dharma keeps moving long after the lesson is heard. Your mind doesn't need to remember every word. Your heart does. Your cells do. Your body remembers truth in a way thought cannot. And that's why sleep becomes sacred in Buddhist practice, not just as rest, but as surrender. A time when the mind steps aside and the Dharma keeps working. The patterns that were being held so tightly begin to relax. The fear that clung to control starts to melt. And without knowing how, you wake up a little lighter, a little clearer, a little more open. This is why trust is a central part of the path. Not trust in a teacher or system, but trust in the process, in the deep intelligence of life, in the knowing that you don't need to hold it all for it to keep moving. That not everything must be understood to be healed. Some wounds dissolve when they're no longer defended. Some suffering ends not through thinking, but through resting. Rest becomes a practice when you believe in the unseen, when you stop needing proof in every moment, when you understand that the soil does its work even in darkness. This kind of trust is powerful. It allows the nervous system to stop bracing. It allows the heart to stop grasping. It lets the body feel safe enough to exhale, to drop into deep rest, to trust that something larger is holding you. The Dharma does not reward effort with success. It reveals peace through surrender, not passive surrender, conscious surrender. A willingness to be moved by life instead of constantly controlling it. And this shift from controller to participant is where healing deepens beyond the visible. Many practitioners notice that their greatest growth happens not during meditation, but in how they live outside of it, in how they breathe during an argument, in how they pause when triggered, in how they respond to change. That's Dharma at work. It's not loud, it doesn't shout, "Here I am." It moves like a river, subtle, strong, shaping everything in its path. And the more you notice these shifts, the more trust grows. You see that you don't have to be perfect for healing to happen. You don't have to be in control for peace to arrive. You just have to be open, receptive, honest, willing to meet each moment without resistance. And yes, there will be moments when the old self returns, when fear tightens, when habits pull you back. But now you notice. And noticing is enough to interrupt the cycle. You don't spiral as far, you return quicker. You feel the Dharma bringing you back, not through punishment, but through quiet guidance, like a compass realigning itself when shaken. Even in moments of silence, when it feels like nothing is happening, the Dharma is working. Real transformation often happens between the breakthroughs, in the stillness, in the mundane, in the pauses where the ego isn't busy trying to heal itself. That's where space opens. That's where clarity enters. That's where old structures collapse, not with noise, but with a whisper. This is why the Buddha encouraged deep trust in the three jewels. the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Dharma, as truth, is the path itself. It doesn't belong to anyone. It doesn't require belief. It simply asks that you walk it with sincerity. And if you do, even your sleep becomes practice. Even your breath becomes teaching. Even your silence becomes sacred. You are not asked to carry your healing alone. You are asked to meet it and then let it move on its own. Like wind moving through leaves, like rain soaking dry ground, you can rest while it happens. You can sleep while it works. And the more you let go, the more you find yourself waking up lighter, as if something let go of you during the night. This is not magic. It is nature, the nature of the Dharma. To keep unfolding, to keep clearing, to keep softening, even when the conscious mind has stepped away, even when the heart is heavy, even when you feel stuck, the Dharma doesn't stop at resistance, it flows beneath it. So now, if you've been holding yourself tightly, if you've been trying too hard to make healing happen, let this be your permission to stop. Let this be your reminder that the truth you've been absorbing, the insights you've been collecting, the presence you've been practicing, they are working, even now, even in rest. The Dharma doesn't forget you. It lives in you, and every moment of surrender is a doorway, a falling into the current of something that never needed you to lead, only to follow, quietly, humbly, with trust. And now, from the unseen healing that works even in silence, from the soft trust that arises when we stop forcing the process, we move into one of the most uncomfortable truths for the modern mind. That maybe healing doesn't mean fixing. Maybe peace doesn't come from becoming something better. Maybe, in the deepest way, the path isn't about adding more, but dropping the illusion that anything was wrong with us to begin with. This is the radical doorway that Buddhist insight quietly opens. The refusal to fix. Not because we don't care about growth, but because we begin to see that the urge to improve is often just another layer of suffering dressed up as progress. The Western mindset is steeped in self-improvement. It tells us that we're projects under construction, that we are not enough until we upgrade, that happiness is earned through achievement, that peace arrives when we've finally solved all our flaws. But Buddhism points to something else. It whispers that the one trying so hard to improve is also the one keeping the suffering alive, that the fixing mind is the restless mind, that the identity built around self-improvement still revolves around lack. This doesn't mean change is bad. It means that chasing change from the idea that you're broken can never lead to wholeness. You might look successful on the surface, but if your efforts are rooted in rejection of yourself, the results will always feel hollow. You can meditate for hours and still be ruled by the belief that something's missing. You can read every book, say every mantra, follow every rule, and still feel like a problem waiting to be solved. Buddhism flips that on its head. It doesn't tell you to become your best self. It tells you to stop believing in a fixed self altogether, not to destroy it violently, but to watch it gently dissolve. And that shift begins when you stop trying to fix your feelings, your thoughts, your identity, and start sitting with them as they are. As weather, as passing conditions, not as definitions of who you are. The refusal to fix is not apathy, it's presence. It's the bold decision to meet yourself exactly as you are and stop reaching for a better version. Not because you couldn't grow, but because this moment doesn't need to be traded for another one. The breath in your lungs right now is not inferior to the one you'll have after 10 years of practice. It's the doorway, not the obstacle. When you sit without the intention to improve, something rare begins to unfold. You begin to notice how much peace is already here, how much energy was being wasted trying to reach some perfect mental state. How many quiet joys were missed because you were measuring your progress instead of living your life. You begin to feel life directly, not filtered through the lens of becoming someone else, but met with full presence. This is where real clarity emerges. This teaching is especially important for those who have been on the path a long time, because the trap of spiritual ambition is real. You start wanting to be the calmest, the wisest, the most awakened. And suddenly, the practice becomes another ladder. But there is no ladder. There is only here. And if your practice isn't bringing you deeper into this breath, this body, this moment, it's just another disguise for control. To refuse fixing is to refuse war with yourself. It's the choice to stop dissecting every reaction, to stop turning every flaw into a project, to stop performing growth and actually rest in awareness. Because awareness doesn't need to fix, it sees, and in that seeing, many things that once felt broken begin to soften, not through strategy, but through attention. This teaching is echoed in the Zen phrase, just this moment, just this feeling, just this breath. No commentary, no improvement, just meeting what is. And that's the hardest thing for the ego to accept, because the ego survives by being dissatisfied. It needs a problem to solve. But the moment you stop feeding it a problem, its grip starts to loosen. And what remains isn't emptiness, it's spaciousness. Letting go of the fixing mind reveals how deeply we've been conditioned to relate to ourselves as projects, how even our inner work can become a performance. But healing doesn't require performance. It requires honesty. And sometimes honesty sounds like, I'm tired of trying to be someone else. That exhaustion is not failure. It's the beginning of wisdom. Because from that place, you can finally rest. And in rest, healing that you never had to earn begins to arrive. This doesn't mean we don't take responsibility. It doesn't mean we ignore behavior that causes harm, but we approach it differently, not from the belief that we're defective, but from compassion, from the understanding that when pain is met without judgment, it softens. That change happens not through self-attack, but through clarity, and clarity can only arise in stillness, not in a flurry of fixing. You might notice that some parts of you still resist this, that the mind wants a plan, a goal, a structure. That's okay. Let those parts be seen too. Let them breathe. Don't fix them either. Let them exist in the same field of awareness as everything else. The part of you that wants to fix is also welcome, but it doesn't need to be in charge. As you rest in this perspective, a quiet confidence starts to emerge. Not the confidence that comes from achievement, but the confidence that comes from presence. You realize that you can hold your anger without trying to eliminate it. You can sit with sadness without trying to analyze it. You can feel fear without trying to conquer it. And in doing so, these emotions begin to shift, not because you made them, because you didn't interfere. This is the great paradox of the path. that the less you try to change, the more change arises naturally. The less you grip, the more fluid things become. The more you allow, the more you see that what you were seeking was always right here. You also begin to notice others differently. When you stop trying to fix yourself, you stop trying to fix everyone else. You listen more, you judge less. You hold space instead of offering advice. And your presence becomes healing, not because of what you say, but because of how you are. Settled, soft, real. There's a kind of sacredness that comes from being with someone who no longer needs to be impressive, who no longer performs growth, who meets the moment without an agenda, and you can become that person, for yourself and for others. Not by achieving some level of spiritual perfection, but by letting go of the illusion that there was a level to reach in the first place. This teaching does not mean you will never feel pain again, or that you will never fall back into patterns. It means that even when you do, you don't abandon yourself. You don't turn the moment into a problem. You don't rush to improve it. You sit, you feel, you breathe. And the wave passes, not because you controlled it, but because you didn't. And slowly, your life begins to feel different, lighter, not because all the pain is gone, but because you stopped making it wrong, simpler. Not because you have fewer emotions, but because you've stopped turning them into identities, more beautiful. Not because you changed who you are, but because you're no longer hiding under a mask of constant becoming. This is healing without improvement. It's the most radical act of love in a world addicted to performance. It's the choice to stop negotiating with the present, to stop treating yourself like a broken machine, to stop living from the belief that one day you'll finally be enough. You already are. And now, from the soft stillness that comes when there's nothing left to fix, from the rare freedom of resting without a project, we begin to listen even deeper. Not to thought, not to sensation, but to what happens underneath it all when the mind becomes truly quiet. There's something that occurs in these depths of silence that no language can fully describe, but it leaves traces, gentle echoes that change the way the nervous system remembers pain. Because in the stillness of deep meditation, something extraordinary begins. Emotional memory is rewritten, not through analysis, not through story, but through pure presence, through the echo of stillness. In Buddhist meditation, this process is known through the lens of jhana. These are deep states of concentration and absorption, cultivated not through force, but through letting go. When the mind is calm, steady, and not distracted by the usual stream of thoughts, it begins to settle into deeper layers of itself. There is less noise, less inner resistance, and in that clarity, the nervous system gets a new message, one it may have never received before. You are safe. You don't have to defend. You don't have to anticipate danger. You don't have to replay the past. These deep states of stillness begin to create new templates inside the brain. The body starts to associate calm with familiarity rather than with threat. This is crucial because trauma often rewires the nervous system to respond to silence or rest with anxiety. For many, stillness feels unsafe at first. It reminds the body of danger, of what used to happen when nothing was being said, when the chaos stopped just before the storm. But with gentle, repeated exposure to meditative stillness, the system begins to learn something new. Not all silence is dangerous. Some silence is sanctuary. Modern neuroscience is beginning to catch up with what Buddhist monks have known for centuries, that emotional memory is not fixed. It can be softened, rewritten, not by suppressing it, but by giving the nervous system a new environment, a new emotional landscape to explore. When the brain enters deep meditative states, activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning and self-referencing, quietly fades. At the same time, areas responsible for sensory integration and emotional regulation become more active. This balance creates a safe, non-verbal space in which the body can reorganize itself without needing a narrative. Trauma often lives as fragments, not full stories, but pieces, sensations, flashes, emotional spikes. In daily life, these fragments get re-triggered without context. But in meditation, especially in deeper jhana states, the mind is not chasing storylines. It is holding presence, and that presence becomes a container large enough to hold the fragments without being overwhelmed by them. They begin to integrate slowly, silently, without analysis. It's not about remembering what happened. It's about feeling what was never fully felt in an environment that is finally safe. This process happens beyond conscious control. It's not something you make happen. It's something that unfolds when the conditions are right. That's why meditation is not about effort. It's about alignment, creating the conditions for healing to happen naturally through attention, stillness, and breath. Each time the mind rests deeply, the body receives that rest as nourishment. And over time, the accumulation of those quiet moments becomes a new baseline, a new normal. Emotional memory begins to loosen its grip. The sharp edges of old pain become dull. The urgency of fear begins to fade. And this doesn't happen because you convinced yourself with words. It happens because your nervous system started to believe something different. It started to believe the present moment could be trusted. And once that belief takes root, old survival patterns begin to let go. The beauty of jhana is that it's not an escape. It's a return to what the mind is like when it's not split, when it's not chasing the past or fearing the future. In these states, there's no pressure to remember who you were, no need to compare. The sense of self that is always narrating, always performing, falls silent. And what remains is pure experience, direct, wordless, safe. That wordless safety is what begins to replace the emotional residue of past trauma. This doesn't mean the trauma is erased. It means the nervous system doesn't have to respond as if it's still happening. And that shift is everything. That's when you begin to breathe without tension, sleep without interruption, love without bracing, live without apology. For many, the first taste of this happens gradually. The initial stages of meditation may feel chaotic. The mind resists the quiet. The body fidgets. Thoughts shout louder when you try to sit still. But with gentle consistency, the noise begins to quiet. And in the spaces between thoughts, stillness begins to bloom. It may only last a second at first, but that second is powerful, because in that second, the system gets a new imprint, one of peace, of stillness, of nothing needing to be done. Over time, those seconds stretch into minutes, and those minutes begin to shape the emotional body. This is not psychological conditioning, it is spiritual repatterning. A deep inner remembering of what it feels like to be untouched by the storm, not above it, not dissociated from it, just not swallowed by it. Jhana is not a goal to chase. It is a state that arises when striving ceases. When you stop trying to control the experience and start surrendering to presence, it is a refinement of attention so complete that the usual sense of self dissolves. What remains is pure knowing, pure being, and that being leaves an imprint far more powerful than any affirmation or cognitive insight. It leaves the body knowing what safety feels like, not as an idea, but as a felt reality. And that's what rewrites emotional memory, new felt experiences, not forced, but allowed, not shouted, but whispered. These whispers stay, they echo, they change how the body responds to old triggers, they shift how the mind reacts to stress, they slowly untangle the knots that years of survival tied up inside you. This is why stillness is not passive. It is active healing. It is the deepest kind of work, not because it looks dramatic, but because it touches the roots of the pain without digging. It waters what was once dry. It rests what was once overworked. And it does all this without words, without story, just presence. For many trauma survivors, jhana offers something that therapy alone cannot reach: a wordless homecoming, a way to feel safe inside without needing to be told it's safe. A knowing that comes from experience, not explanation. And once that knowing is felt, it changes everything. You no longer need to avoid silence. You begin to seek it, not to escape the world, but to recharge in truth. You stop being afraid of being alone with your mind, because your mind is no longer a battlefield. It's becoming a garden, and the seeds planted in jhana, the seeds of peace, spaciousness, equanimity, grow with time, attention, and rest. Even if you never reach the deeper jhana states, even if you only touch the surface, the path still works. Because every moment of stillness teaches the body something new. Every breath taken in non-resistance becomes a medicine. Every second of full presence becomes a thread in a new emotional tapestry, one not woven in trauma, but in trust. So now, breathe into this, not to control it, just to meet it. Let the silence echo. Let the stillness do what thought cannot. You are not missing anything. You are not late. You are not behind. The healing is already happening, inside, beneath the surface, where language never needed to reach. And now, from the silent ground, where deep stillness rewires old emotional memory, not through effort, but through presence, we arrive at a wound that often hides behind kindness. The exhaustion that builds not just from doing too much, but from needing to be too much. This is compassion fatigue, and in the Buddhist view, it is not simply physical or emotional burnout. It is a sign that the self has expanded beyond its true role, that somewhere the healer has mistaken themselves for the healing, that the one who helps began to believe they had to hold everything, fix everything, be everything, and underneath that weight, something quietly begins to break. Compassion fatigue often arises in those who have made it their life's purpose to care for others. Parents, therapists, doctors, teachers, spiritual leaders, friends who always say yes. These roles are often worn with pride, but over time they can become armor. And armor is heavy. especially when the world expects you to never take it off. But the Buddhist path shows something different. It reveals that true compassion is not a performance. It is not a role. It flows not from identity, but from emptiness, from the recognition that no separate self does the helping. That help simply arises when suffering is seen clearly. When compassion becomes ego-driven, it quietly shifts from presence to pressure. The desire to alleviate others' pain becomes entangled with the need to feel valuable, needed, righteous, or in control. And this is where fatigue begins, not just in the body, but in the spirit, because helping becomes a source of identity, and identities must be constantly maintained. The moment the helper fails, forgets, or falls apart, the story of who they are begins to shake. And rather than resting, they push harder. Rather than stepping back, they reach further, until there is nothing left to give. Buddhism teaches that clinging to identity, even a noble one, creates suffering. And the helper identity is no exception. When you believe your worth is tied to your ability to serve, you stop being a person. You become a function, and this disconnects you from your own needs, your own limits, your own right to rest. You begin to treat yourself like a tool, useful only when giving, broken when tired, and healing begins not by trying to restore the function, but by letting go of the role. This is where Buddhist humility becomes medicine, not the humility of self-deprecation, but the humility that arises from seeing through the illusion of a fixed self, from understanding that suffering belongs to all beings and no one can carry it alone, that no person is the source of salvation, that wisdom and compassion are not personal achievements, but universal qualities that arise when the mind is quiet and the heart is open. When the healer steps back, not out of apathy, but out of clarity, something begins to soften. The compulsion to save weakens. The tendency to override one's own pain in order to serve others begins to unravel. And what replaces it is not selfishness, but balance, compassion that includes the self, giving that flows from fullness, not depletion, listening that doesn't drown in other people's stories. Many who suffer from compassion fatigue don't realize it until it's deep, because exhaustion becomes normal, numbness becomes routine, and guilt keeps them going. The guilt of stepping back, of saying no, of resting while others suffer. But Buddhism offers a radical shift. It teaches that suffering does not end through martyrdom, it ends through awakening. And awakening is not achieved by running yourself into the ground. It is revealed when the striving stops. The path of the Bodhisattva, the awakened one who returns to help others, is not about personal glory. It's about letting go of self-centered striving in both directions. Not just selfish desire, but also self-sacrificial performance. The Bodhisattva helps not because they need to be seen a certain way, but because they no longer see themselves as separate. The action is spontaneous, free from identity, free from expectation. This is what Buddhist detachment brings to the healer's journey. A chance to stop over-identifying with the role, a chance to be human again, to cry, to rest, to say, "I don't know," to step away without shame. And in that space, true compassion can be reborn, not as duty, but as a natural response, not as a mask, but as an expression of presence. The body often gives the first signals. tiredness that doesn't go away with sleep, irritability that feels out of character, a slow dulling of joy, of meaning. These aren't failures, they are messengers, not telling you to do more, but to stop, to listen, to let the role fall away so the person underneath can breathe again. This doesn't mean abandoning service. It means returning to it with clearer boundaries, with deeper awareness, with the humility to say, "This pain is not mine to carry alone." It means trusting that others have their path, their dharma, and that your presence is not the source of their healing. It is simply one condition among many. There is a deep healing that comes when the helper surrenders the need to be the one who always helps, when they allow themselves to be helped, when they receive without guilt, when they rest without proving, when they see that the Dharma doesn't need them to perform, it simply needs them to be honest, open, and present. In practical terms, this means scheduling rest as sacred, not as a reward, but as part of the path. It means checking the motivations behind your service. Are you giving because the moment asks for it, or because your identity demands it? It means noticing when fatigue becomes a badge of honor, when exhaustion becomes proof of value. These are signs that the ego has co-opted compassion. The remedy is not withdrawal. It's returning to source, to presence, to the simple truth that compassion without wisdom burns out, and wisdom without compassion becomes cold. The balance lies in non-attachment, not to people, not to roles, not to the story of who you think you need to be. Even traditional Buddhist communities recognize this. Monks rotate responsibilities, teachers step down, retreats include time for solitude, silence, renewal. There is no pride in burnout. There is no virtue in collapse. There is only awareness. And from awareness, the right action arises, not forced, but timely, not habitual, but conscious. One of the most healing realizations for those in caregiving roles is this: you are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to let someone else hold the space. Your worth does not rise and fall with your usefulness. The Dharma is still alive in you, even when you are lying down, even when you are doing nothing, even when your only act of compassion is offering it to yourself. Let that truth settle into the places that feel heavy. Let it reach the part of you that always shows up. Let it wrap around the voice that says, "You're only valuable when you give." And watch what begins to soften. The tension, the resentment, the silent grief of being unseen. They all begin to melt, not through more doing, but through being seen. You don't need to rescue everyone. You need to return to the part of you that never needed to be a rescuer in the first place. The part that loves not because it's expected, but because it's free. The part that rests without apology. The part that knows that silence is also a gift. So now, take a breath for yourself, not as preparation to serve, but as a declaration that you matter, that you deserve the same kindness you give to others, that being the healer includes healing yourself. And now, from the tenderness of laying down the rescuer's burden, from the deep exhale that comes when the healer no longer needs to carry every wound, we step into one of the most misunderstood and emotionally complex practices on the path: forgiveness. Not the version that requires an apology, not the version that comes with a bow and a perfect resolution. The Buddhist path offers something different. It reveals the paradox that healing through forgiveness does not require anyone else's involvement. It begins the moment the grip loosens. Not their grip on you, but your grip on the pain. Pain has its own gravity. When something unjust happens, the wound creates a story. That story becomes a container for the memory. It says, "This should not have happened," and often it's right. But if the story is held too tightly, if the mind refuses to put it down until the world corrects itself, the pain starts to grow roots. The original harm may have happened once, but the retelling becomes endless. Every time the story plays, the body tightens, the breath shortens, the anger resurfaces, and waiting for closure becomes a second prison layered over the first. Buddhist forgiveness begins where control ends. It is not dependent on the one who caused harm. It is not a transaction. It is a release, a decision not to excuse, not to forget, but to stop bleeding for someone else's wound. In this view, forgiveness is not for the other person. It is the gift you give yourself so that your suffering is no longer tethered to what they did or didn't do. This is not easy, especially when the harm runs deep, when betrayal came from someone trusted, when no apology ever came, when the pain was dismissed or denied. The heart may cling to the idea that justice is needed for peace. That closure must arrive before the wound can heal. But closure is often a fantasy. It assumes the past can be reshaped by someone else's words, and the Dharma gently teaches that this belief only delays freedom. The Buddha taught that clinging to anger is like holding a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who burns. Forgiveness in this light is not agreement with what happened. It is not minimizing it. It is simply putting the coal down, not because the fire went out, but because you're done being the one who holds it. To forgive in the Buddhist sense is to see clearly the nature of impermanence and karma. Everything that arises, including harm, is a result of causes and conditions, most of them outside our control. People act from their own confusion, fear, pain. This doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable, and understanding opens a small doorway where blame once blocked the light. This is where metta, loving kindness, enters the practice. It begins with sending kindness to oneself, to the part that was hurt, to the part that still feels abandoned, angry, unseen. You hold that part without rushing it, without pretending it should be over by now. You sit with it like a quiet friend, and slowly the inner landscape begins to change. The pain is no longer a command, it's a signal, not to retaliate, but to tend. As the heart softens, the grip on needing someone else to fix the past begins to release. You realize that no apology, no sentence, no justice can truly undo what happened. But the freedom to move forward is still within reach, if you're willing to reclaim your peace without waiting for someone else to hand it to you. This is the forgiveness paradox. True forgiveness happens in solitude. It doesn't require a witness. It doesn't need to be approved. It's an internal act of courage, a quiet moment of truth when the heart says, "I no longer need to hold this hurt to remember who I am." In some Buddhist practices, forgiveness is offered through meditation phrases. You sit quietly and repeat inwardly, "If I have hurt you in any way, knowingly or unknowingly, I ask for your forgiveness. Then, if you have hurt me in any way, knowingly or unknowingly, I forgive you. And finally, if I have hurt myself in any way, knowingly or unknowingly, I forgive myself. These phrases are not mantras. They are invitations. They are keys that unlock the cage of grievance. This form of forgiveness does not rush the process. It does not force reconciliation. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is forgive someone and never speak to them again. Forgiveness does not require reunion. It requires clarity. It says, I see you for what you are, and I release the need for your remorse to free myself. Forgiveness also doesn't mean forgetting. Memory is part of wisdom. It helps you see patterns. It helps you create boundaries. But memory without forgiveness becomes armor. It keeps you frozen. Forgiveness lets the memory remain, but loosens the sting. It turns the story into a teaching, not a trap. Some resist forgiveness because they believe it lets the other person off the hook. But Buddhism makes a crucial distinction. You are not letting them escape responsibility. You are letting yourself escape the cycle of suffering. Karma is not erased by forgiveness. It continues. Every action has its result. But that result does not need to live in your heart forever. Often, the hardest part is self-forgiveness. The mind loops on what you should have seen, what you didn't say, what you allowed. But guilt, like blame, holds you hostage to the past. Buddhist compassion begins with seeing your own humanity. That you, too, were operating under conditions. That you didn't know what you know now. That pain made choices before wisdom could arrive. Forgiveness of self is not letting yourself off easy. It is telling the truth without punishment. It is letting the heart rest from its own war. Forgiveness also becomes necessary in daily life, not just in large betrayals. Small grievances build up. The friend who forgot to text back, the stranger who cut you off, the family member who speaks without listening. Without a practice of letting go, these moments collect. They turn into emotional static. And soon, your heart is cluttered. Forgiveness clears the field. It lets you breathe. This doesn't mean becoming passive. Forgiveness doesn't mean silence in the face of harm. You can forgive and still say, "This is not okay." You can forgive and walk away. The key is whether your action comes from presence or pain. Forgiveness gives you back that choice. It makes response possible where before there was only reaction. And sometimes forgiveness happens long after you thought it would. Years later, something softens, a word is spoken, a dream comes, a meditation cracks something open. You realize the anger is gone, not because you forced it, but because you no longer need it. That's how forgiveness works, quietly, slowly, like a thaw. In Buddhist tradition, there's an understanding that everything is empty of fixed identity, including the one who hurt you, including the one who was hurt. What you are now is not what you were then, and what they are now may not be what they were either. This doesn't excuse, but it opens a door. The past loses its grip, not because it's erased, but because it's no longer solid. So now, breathe into the place where the pain still echoes, not to change it, just to witness it. Ask gently, what part of me is still waiting for someone else to make this right? Can I release that part, even if they never do? You may not feel ready. That's okay. Forgiveness is not a deadline. It's an offering, a path you walk slowly, a door you open a little more each day. Some days it swings wide, some days it stays closed. The path is still valid. And from this path of quiet release, from the deep act of letting go without needing resolution, we begin to build something new. A strength that doesn't wall out the world, but bends without breaking. A resilience that stays open, but protected. A softness that survives not by hiding, but by knowing it cannot be broken. That's where we go next. A strength that isn't loud, but unshakable. Let's keep going. There's more truth waiting just ahead. And now, from the gentle release of forgiveness, the kind that asks nothing in return, not even closure, we move into the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself with noise. A strength that doesn't need to fight to survive. One that remains open even after being hurt. One that allows emotion without being consumed by it. This is not the hardened shell most people build to protect themselves. This is something else, something softer, a kind of invisible armor that protects without numbing, a resilience that moves like water, fluid but powerful. In Buddhist practice, resilience isn't the ability to avoid suffering. It's the capacity to meet it with presence. It's not the absence of vulnerability. It's the presence of awareness while vulnerable. The mind doesn't need to shut down. The heart doesn't need to close. Instead, mindfulness trains the system to stay present without collapsing. To feel everything, but be held by something deeper than feeling. That something is the soft armor. It doesn't block life. It doesn't resist experience. It bends with it. The usual response to emotional pain is defense, walls, silence, withdrawal, or attack. But those strategies often carry their own weight. The harder the wall, the more brittle the inner world becomes. Protection becomes isolation. Strength becomes numbness. But mindfulness teaches a different path. One where you can feel fully and still stay intact. One where experience moves through you instead of taking you down. This soft armor is built slowly through practice. Every time you sit with discomfort instead of reacting, a layer is formed. Every time you let anger pass through without latching onto it, another layer settles. Not layers of separation, but layers of steadiness. You become familiar with intensity, not in a way that dulls it, but in a way that no longer overwhelms. You learn that emotion is weather, and you are the sky. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is spaciousness, a heart wide enough to feel sorrow and still speak gently. A mind trained enough to hold grief without needing to escape. This is the result of presence applied consistently, not perfectly, not with effort, just again and again, choosing to stay instead of shut down. That choice rewires everything. The nervous system begins to recognize that intensity is not a threat, that pain is not permanent, that feelings are not failures. And over time, the baseline shifts. Stress rises and falls without hijacking the whole system. Fear surfaces without dictating action. Sadness arrives without pulling everything into darkness. You become more stable, not by force, but by familiarity with your own experience. This kind of resilience doesn't always look impressive. It's quiet, It's the pause before responding. It's the breath that stops the spiral. It's the ability to hear criticism without collapsing, to love again after heartbreak, to feel anger without acting it out. That's not weakness. That's strength matured. In Buddhist teachings, the quality of equanimity plays a central role in this. Equanimity isn't indifference, it's balance, a calmness that comes from seeing clearly, that sees joy and pain, praise and blame, gain and loss, and doesn't swing wildly between them. It's the groundedness that keeps you from chasing highs or running from lows. And this balance becomes the core of soft armor. You meet what comes, not with resistance, but with clarity. You respond, not out of habit, but out of choice. This doesn't mean you become a blank slate. Emotions still happen, but you're no longer ruled by them. You stop clinging to the highs. You stop fearing the lows. Everything becomes usable. Even the difficult moments are no longer threats. They are teachers, and each one strengthens your ability to remain grounded. Part of this soft armor is also the ability to name what's happening without becoming it. You don't say, "I am broken." You say, "There is sadness here." You don't say, "I am angry." You say, "Anger is moving through." This language isn't just semantic, it's structural. It reshapes how identity is formed around emotion. It makes space between the feeling and the self, and in that space, resilience lives. This practice extends beyond formal meditation. It's how you walk into hard conversations, how you sit with someone else's pain without absorbing it, how you return to center after being pushed. The world doesn't need more people hardened by pain. It needs people who can stay soft without being destroyed. And that's exactly what this practice cultivates. Mindfulness also helps you become aware of your edge, the moment where presence slips into defense, where softness begins to turn rigid. That edge is important. It shows you your current capacity, and honoring that edge is also resilience. You don't push through it. You pause, you breathe, you widen your window slowly, and that slow expansion becomes a durable transformation. This approach also redefines boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They're the recognition of where your responsibility ends, where your energy is no longer required, where your peace matters. The soft armor allows you to say no without guilt, to walk away without resentment, to stay open without being taken advantage of. That's a kind of emotional clarity many never experience, not because they can't, but because they were never shown how to find it. In relationships, this clarity becomes a gift. You stop playing roles. You stop reacting from wounded patterns. You show up with presence, honesty, steadiness. And you give others the space to do the same. You don't absorb their storm. You witness it. You don't try to fix their silence. You respect it. And in that respect, both people grow. When life throws chaos your way, and it will, the soft armor doesn't stop the impact, but it changes the way you receive it. You fall, but you don't shatter. You hurt, but you don't shut down. You get back up, not with bitterness, but with quiet strength. And each time you do, that inner stability grows deeper. The world trains us to toughen up, to fight back, to never show weakness. But Buddhism teaches the opposite, to stay soft, to remain open. Not as a victim, but as someone who knows their strength is not in avoidance but in presence, the one who can sit with pain and still speak gently, the one who can see clearly and still choose kindness, the one who doesn't need armor made of steel, because their heart, their breath, their awareness is enough. This is not an idea. It is a skill, built moment by moment, breath by breath. And every time you choose awareness over reaction, you reinforce it. Every time you let emotion pass through instead of attaching to it, you strengthen it. It's not about becoming unshakable in the traditional sense. It's about becoming unbreakable in your ability to stay present. This is the soft armor. It doesn't protect you from life. It lets you live fully within it, without shutting down, without building walls, without losing yourself to every wave that crashes. And that, in a world constantly pulling you into chaos, is a kind of miracle. So now, carry this strength with you. Let it settle beneath the surface. Let it hold you the next time life presses hard. You don't have to close. You don't have to harden. You have something better. You have presence. You have breath. You have awareness. And that is more than enough. After everything we've explored together, through silence, stillness, breath, and the soft release of old identities, what remains is not just knowledge. It's a felt shift, a quiet, steady unfolding back toward wholeness. Over these 3 hours, you've gone deeper than most people ever dare to. You've touched the medicine of emptiness, the strength of surrender, the healing power of letting go without needing answers. You've learned how forgiveness works without apologies, how resilience can be soft, and how even your sleep can be rewired into a sanctuary of healing. This wasn't just content. This was a return, a homecoming, to the version of you that doesn't need fixing, the part that was always whole beneath the stories. And now the real healing begins, not through effort, but through remembering. Let this wisdom echo long after the audio fades. Let it keep working while you rest. Let it meet you in your breath, your pauses, your small daily choices. That's where the Dharma lives, not in theories, but in presence. If something touched you tonight, if even one sentence gave your heart room to breathe, let us know. Drop a comment below and share what spoke to you most. You never know who else you'll inspire to begin their own path. And if you'd like more of these deep, soul-shifting journeys, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. There's more waiting for you here. Until then, sleep deeply, heal quietly, wake up lighter. The path is inside you now.